My name is Matt, and I spent the last 11 months designing and building a DIY off-the-grid aquaponic greenhouse. We started with ground similar to this one, and we marked off the ground in a big rectangle, 16 by 11 feet, and then dug out the topsoil. And the rectangle was long ways facing south, as you can see here, and that is so that as the sun goes by in the winter, more plants inside the greenhouse, or the pit which will become a greenhouse, will be able to see that. So after digging this out farther with a bobcat, we hit rock, and so now I'm in the process of going deeper with a pickaxe and shovel. So this is the first actual update. Then those posts over there are gonna become a fence around here because this is cow pasture, and we don't want the cows to fall in the greenhouse and hurt themselves and destroy all the work that I've done. So that's the plan at this point. And I'm hoping for this side to be the lower side, because that direction is south, so that side needs to be the upper side, and so the roof in theory will be slanted in that direction. It rained a lot. I'm at the point of putting down the plastic. And I think the most important thing when I'm doing this is when I brace it or put something on it to hold it there, the very last part that needs to be put down is the corner that's going to have the most stress on it. Because if I did that first, then everything else gets put down, maybe that would be too tight and it might tear. And that's definitely something I don't want to have happen. So I'm going to put dirt to hold this here on the lower side last, and everything else is going to be before that. So, why am I using 2 layers? I'm using 2 layers because, first of all, this layer is UV treated, so hopefully it'll block out some of the UV rays and it won't destroy my larger second layer. So why use 2 layers? The biggest reason that things break down over time, other than the sun oxidizing it, is water. Water helps bacteria breed and live, and the more you can keep water out of the ground that you're using, then the better. I thought about just using 1 sheet from corner to corner to corner and just making a big rectangle. But then I have all of the rainwater that's going to be pouring down over here and all around the building or the hole, and that rainwater is going to be going downhill and maybe rotting my wood. So I'm trying to keep that from happening as much as possible. I want it to last as long as I can because I put a lot of hard work into it. So on top of that, I'm going to use this more expensive and hopefully better plastic right over top of where the sun's going to be shining in. I don't want to make everything really tight, and the reason is this hole is surrounded by a bunch of dirt, but after time passes, worms get going through there, maybe some moisture gets in there somehow, which I'm trying to prevent, but over time that dirt's going to sink in. So if it's stretched really tight, sinking in dirt, that's going to put a lot of strain on those corners, and that's really the main reason that the dirt's piled up how it is. I want to keep as much stress off the corners as possible so that it doesn't tear. So I need to make sure that as time packs in that dirt around there, that it doesn't make any of my corners rip, because that would be disastrous. Here we are in the greenhouse. This is probably the first video I've taken inside of it. So here's the latch I put on the door, which I had to move because it didn't line up right. And I put this foam stuff around here, all the cracks, so I could seal it. I'm still going to put some sort of little strip of insulation around here. Can't think of what it's called right now. So the roll of plastic that I had was 100 feet by 20 feet, and I couldn't get it any wider than that. So what I did was I cut it in half, so I had 50 by 20, and then I taped it together the other way, so I had 50 by 40. And so here you can see the line of tape that went in between them. So what I'm going to do is put caulking here on the upper side so it will be watertight and airtight. Right now it's just a piece of tape that I put there to hold it together. It's just a temporary thing. It will not stop the water, especially over time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put some more of this foam in all the cracks so I can keep my heat in here. It is very warm in here right now. Outside it's about 70 or 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and in here it's in the 80s or 90s, especially the higher you get. So what I did here was, these boards had a lot of holes in them. I covered them with little pieces of duct tape, but what will happen over time is it'll peel off. So what I'm going to do, I bought some of this Flex Seal. Well, Flex Seal is the version that you see on TV. There's a guy advertising it. It's like $11 or $12 for a can. This is the Dollar General version, and it is half the price. So I'm going to use that to cover all those pieces of tape, and I'm going to use these to seal in the cracks. And so far it's worked really well, so I expect that it'll work for what I need it to now. So here in a minute I'm going to start using some of these foam sealers, but right now I just noticed that how much water is accumulating in here, and there's air getting trapped underneath of this sheet of plastic, so I need to address that. But right now I'm going to use the foam sealer. But there's so much water, you can see so much water up there, and sometimes it drips off, and there's no circulating water in here right now. This is all just moisture from the grass outside. So moisture is definitely something to take into consideration when you're really making anything outside. You always want to make sure you use outdoor sealants and watertight sealants, things like that. So right now, putting this plastic up, wind has really been my enemy. At first it was nice and calm, so everything went smoothly, and here an hour or two ago the wind picked up just a little bit, and this sheet is so big that every little crack and ripple under it was feeding in and making this whole place bubble up. So ideally the plastic's going to be resting on top of these thin boards here, but I can't really do that while it's windy, or it'll just either tear it off or cause other problems. So once the wind dies down, I'm going to address that. Alright, I'm going to start using this stuff. It's for gaps bigger than 1 inch. And you're supposed to shake it a little bit. Have everything where I want it. And there it comes. When you're using this stuff, you need to know that it's going to expand a good bit even after it looks like it's stopping. By the time I come out here tomorrow, this will be a great deal bigger. So when I put this line on here, this was stuff gaps less than 1 inch or up to 1 inch. But now you can see how big the bead is, and I just put one quick line on it, and now it's like 2 or 3 times bigger than how I put it on. I need to get all the cracks, even though it will expand. I want to make sure I have enough there that I don't let any cold air in during the winter. It gets very cold here. Probably have to come back through later after I see how big this is going to get. And fill up whatever's left. Last time I was filling cracks greater than an inch. This time it's just going to be these really thin cracks and maybe up to almost an inch. So it's just going to be one quick spray the whole way across. Just like this. Because it'll get bigger and I don't want to waste any. So, now I'm going to put on this Dollar General version of this Flex Seal. And it's just for tiny cracks and holes. And I use this duct tape here to cover all of these holes, but the problem is, as the sunlight comes in and oxidizes this tape and the moisture that's stuck in here and things like that, it's going to make it peel off, and it's going to make it basically not do what I want it to do, which is stop the air from escaping through. So that's why I got this, because it's just going to be a thin coat of rubber which will not allow air to pass through it, and it'll keep the tape there, and it'll keep everything from allowing air to pass through, and keep the sun from destroying it. And it's basically like a can of spray paint. There's nothing to really expand like this other foam. This is spray rubber rather than plastic foam like the other stuff. It has a pretty strong smell. I should be wearing a mask. So it's not pretty, but it's going to provide a better seal. I'm out here to check my slat trap, which is sort of like a box, and I'm going to see if I can find some fish so that I can stock my aquaponic setup without having to pay for fish at a pet store. So I'm going to reel it in and see if there's anything inside. Alright, so here we are. I'm bringing the trap over to the steepest side so that I can stand here without sinking into the mud very much. At first I was tossing the trap in, but I had to put rocks inside to make the trap sink, which also, unfortunately, when I was tossing the trap in, was causing it to break one of the slats. The slats are just pretty thin pieces of wood. I can hear some fish in there flopping around, which is a good sign. The construction's pretty simple. I thought about making a video to show how I made this trap, but since I wasn't sure if it would work or not, I decided not to waste the time into showing it step by step. I can explain now how it worked whenever I made it. So there's my rock that's a weight. So we have, just splash some water in my mouth. We have 1, 2, 3, looks like 4 little bluegills, and the slats are very thin, The cracks are thin so that nothing can escape, and they swim in through this wire that has the opening here on the outside. And then of course the bait's inside next to the wire so that they're attracted to it and they try to come in the first place. If you put the bait in the back, thinking they had to swim the whole way in and definitely get stuck, then they're not going to be able to find it and they'll swim away, which is something that you don't want since you want to catch them. So now I'm trying to clean out this wire cone a little bit. I need something to push it through. There's algae in the middle of the cone, and that would make it more difficult for a fish to find it. Though yesterday, when it was completely clogged with this algae, I did find a tadpole in here, which must have pushed his way past all of the algae to get inside and then couldn't get back out. That'll just have to do. So I'm going to leave these here in the water until I'm ready for them, if I use them at all. I might just end up buying some goldfish or something from a pet store. If I do it this way, I can get my fish for free. At least pet store fish, I wouldn't have to think about whether or not they would have any parasites. I don't imagine that a pet store fish would have parasites or something, some illness, but you never know. Wild fish might be better. So anyway, instead of throwing the trap in, and I forgot to put my weight back inside, another thing that I did in order to see how this fits on exactly is I made 2 blue marks with a Sharpie so I could see where these slats were supposed to go. If I didn't do that, maybe I'd put them in the wrong order and then the cracks would be too wide and the fish would be able to escape. So this wire mesh inside is shaped like a cone. The wide side is over here, and then the other end is maybe about right here inside. That's smaller, so that the fish can find their way through but not come back through. You go through the effort of catching them, you don't want them to escape. So now I'm going to put this back relatively where I had it. And the thing to remember here is I need to slide it and avoid the algae so that the front end doesn't get too clogged with algae like it did the first time. I was putting it in at night, or it was pretty dark, so I couldn't exactly see where I was pulling it. During the day, it's much easier to see where the algae is. So anyway, while I'm pulling this over, I can talk about the construction if you care to make something like this yourself. Remember that the cracks need to be small enough to keep in whatever fish size that you want, and the same goes with the wire mesh cone inside. You want the smallest end to be able to barely fit in the fish size that you want. Nothing bigger will be able to get in, and smaller things will have an easier time finding their way out. So those are just some things to consider. You can make this trap really any size. Another thing is, The two ends are basically just rectangle blocks of wood, and the slats are just another piece of a 2x4 cut really thin with holes drilled on each end so I could screw it into the other blocks, the two end blocks. This time I'm going to try to put it a little bit more in the algae. Say right there. It's in between some algae. Some fishers should be able to find it. You can make it so that it would be easier to open or something like that, but 4 screws for me is an easy enough thing to do, so I don't have to waste time and money buying something or making something that's going to be like a better hinge or anything like that. So you can see there the end that the fish are supposed to swim in. It doesn't sink all the way because that rock should have been bigger to make it sink more, but then it would drag the bottom and fill up with algae and mud. I don't want that to happen either. So I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that if you want to catch some minnows or something, you could do it. And something I forgot to mention was the bait. The bait's inside the front, just behind the wire mesh. I cut the end off of some pantyhose and put the bait inside, which was a whole mess of stuff. Hot dog, peanut butter, corn, all of this soaked in salmon and soy sauce, or sauteed in salmon and soy sauce, you could say, in order to track different fish. My goal is to catch catfish, but I'm not even sure if there are any in here anymore, so I have not been lucky in that respect. But I did catch the 4 bluegills, and they should stay in there until I'm ready to use them in my system. So that's about it. I just fastened the pantyhose, tied off the open end, and fastened it to the wire mesh inside so that fish could get close to the entrance and find their way in there. So thanks for watching, and hopefully this video helps you. So here we are, going in the entrance. It's 52 degrees out here, Fahrenheit. Walk inside, it's very steamy. My glasses just fogged up right away. And here's our thermometer over here. Let's see what it says. It is 100 degrees in here and 50% humidity. So that's a little bit of a relief. Though the sun is out, so that will likely drop a great deal whenever the sun goes down and it stops heating the room. So I've plugged almost every hole. The only 2 that I'm aware of that are not plugged from inside is this here, which leads out to where I'm going to have the solar panel. It's just a PVC pipe. And the other one is where my first layer of plastic here meets the, since I cut the first sheet into 2 halves and put them together on the other side, there's like a foot-long overlap, and on one side of the overlap is where some air can come through. So I need to seal that. I did the rest with caulking, but that side pulled apart, and I've discovered that caulking's not very good for sealing the plastic. It doesn't stick to it very well. It'll sometimes just pull apart even with just a little bit of wind or any movement. So I need to find some other method of doing that. So here we have, I'm on the outside now, and when I made this corner 2 inches lower than the other corner so that all the water would drain over here. And that works fairly well. A little bit gets stuck here and there because it's not completely flat at the bottom, but that's okay. Then this here, I cut a circle here, which I should never have done. I had some other plan, but then I forgot about what I was going to do here and didn't think about it till later. So what I did was I put a sheet of plastic here, taped it down really well, and then sprayed some of that Flex Seal on it to seal it again. Looks like I should put another coat on because some of it has peeled up around the edges, but for the most part it's sealed it pretty well. And this just leads inside. I cut part of a funnel off and it goes into another funnel just in case something bad happens, and that will help block airflow a little bit, and then it drains into the PVC pipe down there and then goes into the barrel. So in a setup like this, gravity is going to be your best friend or your worst enemy. So what my plan here is to have my towers sitting on top of this level, and then these white dish pans, as they were sold at Walmart for 96 cents a piece. If I bought this somewhere else as like a small tote or something, it would have been a good bit more than that. Maybe $2 or $3 a piece for something this size. And this is the plastic that I want, polypropylene. And so I need one there for the pump, and these others are going to be tilted a little bit, not very much, just a little bit for the water at the bottom to drain to this corner. And that's because I don't want the roots, say overnight, to be constantly submerged. If I left it flat, everything would drain until this line here, and I don't want that to be the case. I want it actually to be tilted so that it'll all drain except for along this bottom edge here. So that's why I drilled the hole down here instead of up here, because then there would be this much water sitting in there constantly, and I don't want that. I don't want the roots to rot. Not every kind of root would rot. I've heard that watercress and one or two others would be fine with that, but I don't want that to happen to me for all of my plants, because I'm going to use different plants. So now what I'm doing is I have these grommets, which I bought in bulk so that I wouldn't have to pay a higher price. And the reason was I knew that I wouldn't have a large, wide tote or other container to have the water sitting in. So I knew it would be smaller sections linked together with PVC. So I bought the grommets. So now I can basically make one grow bed into an expandable amount of different sections. For example, it's not just one big wide tote, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and here's the fifth one. And anytime I want to expand that, as long as they're all level with each other, I can put basically as many as I want together. So that's the plan, and a benefit to doing that, in the long run it might not necessarily be much cheaper, but the benefit to doing it that way is I don't need a large flat floor space anywhere, or table, or any other type of large area. I basically can expand it around where my extra space is, and I don't need a lot of it all in one place, which is sort of important because it seems like most of the time when you're doing something there's a lack of space right where you need it the most. So I'm combining these together, and I tried it out already. It works quite well. I put some water over here and tilted it up, and it just drains right through into the other one, which is exactly what I want. And there's been nothing leaking, so that's good. Alright, so here's the concept. The concept is, when the water drains down through the bucket, watering the plants in those holes, once the water reaches the bottom, I want it to drain into these pans, which are all connected, as I think I mentioned before. And so as these all fill up together, since they are connected at the bottom and not the top, they'll all rise and drain together, with the bottom line being where the bottom of the drain is. So assuming the whole thing's level, which is not perfectly level, but is pretty close. Here I have a bullseye level that's going to show that how close it is to being completely flat and level. It's pretty close. So as these fill up, I have my homemade and perhaps sloppily made siphon pump, or bell siphon, which is hopefully going to drain anytime that the water level reaches this part. I might have to cut that a little bit to get it all completely flat and perfect so that it works right, but I'm going to try it without that here shortly, just to see if it functions as it should, and I might not need to trim anything. And over here I put a cap on the end of this pipe so that it wouldn't all just drain out that side. One thing that I could have done if I had thought far ahead would have been to not put that in there immediately, but it's there now in case I want to extend to another grow bed or something later. So what I'm doing right now is I have these two large black totes, and I forget how many gallons they are, maybe about, I want to say 15 or maybe 18, I'm not sure. But the plan is for them to sit here, and I can replenish them with this water tank whenever I need to. And so we have one fish tank and then another one next to it, and the reason for that is in case I end up getting big fish, or some of the fish grow big, or some of the fish have babies, I can separate them without needing to add something later, or sort of make a new complication for myself. I just decided I should buy two of these totes, and at Walmart they were $6. I think they are HDPE. I know they're one of the food safe plastics. So $6 for a tote that size, that was a pretty good deal, and they have lids. The lid's propped over there. So I'm going to use this. I was making a platform for my solar panel, which I'll talk about later on when it's not raining outside. But these two ended up being scraps from what I was doing with that. So I had those two pieces left over. I just thought, well, hey, I'll just push them together and nail them down. So now I have this mostly flat. It's not perfect, but when I get a little bit of weight on there, this will just sit down with the rest of everything. But it's a very flat and very sturdy piece of wood here. So I want to sit the totes on that after I get this nice and level using my bullseye level. So I'm going to put that near that tank, and I don't want this to just sit on the dirt forever because then it'll stay damp. So what I'm going to do is, hopefully it'll fit on there, but I don't think that it will. So I'm going to have to measure that. But if I can get that nice and level, like that would be perfect. I wouldn't have to do a bunch of other stuff to make a nice little perfect place for that. See, I have my tape measure here. Let's see if there would be enough clearance for that. So roughly, I'm going to have 14.5 inches. And assuming it's all flat and level, this would be also 14.5. That's pretty close. So let's see how tall my tote is. Okay. My tote, when you know it, is about 15 or a little over 15. Which is not necessarily a deal breaker here. I'm gonna have to figure something out, and I'll be back. So as you can see, it's a nice, beautiful autumn day. Nice and wintry out here. I just came out and scared away most of the chickens. They know by now when they see me out here they need to start running. And it's because of all the grass seed I put here. But it's too late in the year, I think, for any of it to start growing, which is not something I had thought about when I bought the seed. So I guess there's really no point in shooing them away. They could eat it if they wanted, but I don't know what kind of stuff is on that seed. It's probably not too healthy for them to be eating it. I stacked up these little logs here to cut down on the amount of wind that can flow through. And it is working pretty well. There hasn't been too many windy days since I did that, but it's definitely cutting down. I might try something else to really finish off my problem with the wind, if possible. But it's really just one step at a time. So I see that there is something that is able to sprout right now in this cold weather, and sometimes it even freezes. And these things are still starting to grow. I guess there's some kind of little weed, but they weren't there very long ago, so they're just starting to come up. And these tires, again, same idea with the wood there. Put the tire here, fill it with dirt. It's nice and sturdy at the bottom where it's taking the shape of what it's sitting on, blocking a lot of air. It's really helpful. And I did the same thing up there. I took some chunks of sod and I lined them up and put a board there across the top, and that's pushing against that plastic to help keep some of the air from going up through the plastic, because it all finds its way in some different places, and then it makes the top mushroom up like a bubble. If it does that enough, it's gonna tear something or rip out screws, or rip out nails rather, or something else, something worse. I don't want any of that stuff to happen. So that's a little update on what's been going on. It's been a while since I've taken a video from out here, and I might as well. Here's my solar panel, which I'll probably talk about tomorrow, where it's not raining. It's a little bit more pleasant being out here. I'll talk about positioning it and the angles, and post a few links for that, where you can get a better, more thorough explanation with some pictures, if that helps you. So I've been thinking about this, and what I've decided is it would be a really tight fit. I started to dig out some more of this rock here, this shale, so that I could fit everything in there with just a little bit of clearance, but it would be impossible to do any kind of maintenance on it if I had to do that. And since they're going to be joined by pipe, I'm not going to be able to move them very much. So what I decided was I'm going to have to put them right here, maybe halfway under this thing, so I can still reach in if I need to catch a fish or to do something else. So I'm going to set this right here and level this off better. Originally I had kept these grooves here in case some water came in. They would all just drain down here to this spot, and that's pretty flat, so it makes its way over to that corner. But as it turns out, I should just leave that how it is, and I'm not going to try to really force that little platform under there. It seemed like it was going to fit just about perfectly, so that's what my plan was. But as I mentioned, it would be impossible to do anything, any kind of repair or catch any fish or anything, which was why I put this here. This siphon pump here is going to push water down, and it was just supposed to sit under there and kind of just catch the water, make it easier. But with this tube, I can afford to move it over there, so it doesn't really matter. And I'll have a pipe that goes from there to over here after I get the right tap size. So here is the final product. I have that side slightly elevated. I don't want the wood to sit on the ground because it will rot faster, so it's sitting on a steel rod and a steel rebar and a rock. And it's a very sturdy rock. It's not like this shale that it's on. there's one really thick, like a vein of rock, or like a sheet that went through part of this, and you can see it here, and it doesn't break like the rest of the shale does here. It's actually very strong. So that's what this is. Pieces that I tore out, I made a pile of them outside. So you can see that according to my level, it's not 100% perfect, but it's probably 98. And it's really good there. So now I'm going to set both of those on here. So here we have the two tanks positioned such that I'm going to combine them, probably around in here, maybe as high as this, and then so that the water level will come up to about this high. There's a hole right here in the handle, so I can't come up any higher than, you know, maybe around here. So it's probably going to be around this spot, and that's going to go down there through a pipe and raise the water level in that container there. And the pump has a float valve on it, so as the water level comes up, it'll get power and pump the water up to the bucket, which will be up there. So that's where I am right now. So the task at hand is to create a reservoir. At the bottom of the greenhouse, I have the pump. So the aquarium feeds the pump. The pump pumps water up to the top, and then the water drains down through the different growing towers. So the task at hand is to create the reservoir that the water is pumped into before it starts to drain to the towers. And in order to do that, I have a 3-gallon bucket here, which is made of number 5 polypropylene. It's actually for, I think, washing the floor, which I'm not going to use it for. Number 2, I have this 4-way splitter valve. I've used some of this putty, which is very good putty. It's about $5 for this tube here. It's called Water Weld, and you can sand it. It's NSF, safe for water. What you do is, it looks like this inside the tube, and the outside of this putty is like a white color, and the inside is like a brown gray color. You can see it maybe a little bit there. And so what you do is you tear off as much as you're going to use, and you knead it in your fingers until those two colors have mixed completely. And then at that point, it's ready to set up. So I jammed it into this end and pushed my finger in and made sure it was all in there really secure, because I don't want anything to leak. So now I need to find a way to attach this to this without having any leaks. And the thing that I've come up with is, I'm going to drill a hole in the side, which is the easy part, and here I have two adapters for PVC, and I think the best hold is going to be if I put the hole in the side here, push this through with a rubber O-ring, which I got from Lowe's in this kit of different sized O-rings, because Lowe's didn't have exactly the size I wanted, but it's in this kit, luckily. So I have this little assortment here, and I'm going to use the thickest one that fits on here. I believe this is 1-inch Schedule 40 PVC connector. So I'm going to use this. So I have it threaded in here, threaded there. So when I screw it tight, using a wrench, it should create a watertight seal here. So I'll come back right as soon as that is finished. There are some things that I forgot to mention. You'll also need a piece of tube that's going to fit whatever. If you use a similar apparatus like this, you need a tube that's going to fit on this end, and you need a tube that's going to fit over this end. And it's gonna be over top of this. In fact, there's gonna be 3/4 inch PVC coming out of this. This is an adapter, 1 inch to 3/4 inch. So after this screws together like that inside the bucket, I'm going to have the 3/4 inch pipe coming out, and this will go over that a little bit, and then this is going to go on this end. I'm going to cut it down to probably maybe about this length and just use this part. There's another item called some sort of coupler that has one of these on each end already, but Lowe's did not sell that. They said that it's not made anymore, and that's small of a size. I don't know if that's true, but I know they didn't have it. So essentially this is my new plan, and then to have this here, because unfortunately this size is not PVC. It does not match up. I think it's metric. I bought it from China. There's little Chinese characters on it, and it doesn't match up with anything. But 3/4 pipe with this, it's a very close fit, so that the pipe's going to be in here, and it's going to be just about this size. It's not close enough to just glue it in there like this, so I'm going to put the clamp around it and do it that way. I might need to heat it up a little bit to get this to fit in there, but it's going to fit. So I went ahead and put some primer and cement in here and fastened the 3/4 inch pipe to it. So I decided on the fly that instead of using just a short piece and attaching this tube onto it, I would use a longer piece, and then I would need less 3/4 inch or 3/8 inch tube on the inside going to the towers. So this also allows more water to feed there more quickly, since it's a larger diameter pipe. So that's the idea behind that, and it sort of just hit me and made sense whenever I was about to cut the pipe. So there's the end result as far as this is concerned. Now I'm going to see if it passes the leak test. Matter of fact, I'm going to give that cement just a little bit longer to dry. It should be dry, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. So this plastic is about a 1/16 thick, maybe slightly smaller than that. And when I look at these two pieces of plastic, they have probably 1/8 of an inch between them. Some of that's going to get eaten up with this O-ring that's in there. You can hardly see it now, but I'm thinking that I should maybe make it a little bit tighter. I think if I go too tight, I might tear this bucket, and that's something that I don't want to do. So I think I'll just try it as it is and see how that goes. So I decided to continue with this, give that more time to dry, and I need some place for the water to go. I need it to be stopped, because if I tried to see if everything's nice and secure there, it would just leak out this end. So what I decided was that I would finish this, and after finishing it, then I'll be able to fill up the bucket and control it with these valves, which is the end goal in the first place. So I'm going ahead and attaching these, and it was quite difficult to push the pipe into this tube, which is good, but in order to help it out a little bit, I used this carpenter knife to to scrape off the edge a little bit of this pipe and off the inside of this tube in order to push them through. It was very tough to push it on there. As I understand, you could use heat in order to do that, but I don't have a heat gun or anything else to heat it up with easily. I suppose I could use a flame, but I didn't want to do that either. So I'm attaching these and hopefully they will stop anything from leaking. Since there's just going to be 3 gallons worth of pressure on them, I don't think that's going to be any sort of issue. This tube itself is only rated for 45 psi, and I don't have any idea what this is rated for, but it should be fine with what I'm doing. 3 gallons is not a lot of pressure. So it might be difficult to see what I'm doing here, but I'm going to put water in the bucket and we'll see if there are any leaks anywhere. So there's one place to look, and there are some other places to look. So here we go. So, no leak, full bucket, 3 gallons, and no leaks over here either. You can see a small little air bubble here because it's away from, it got trapped when the water flooded in. Let's just try this once. And there you have it. Check on the putty end. No leaks there either. Now I'm at the point of tapping a hole in that barrel so that I can screw one of these 1/2-inch PVC fittings into it. Here's what I bought originally. Here's a 1/2-inch tap and drill bit. And here's a 1/2-inch drill bit, or a 1/2-inch tap, rather. You can see this one is very different than this one, even though they're both a 1/2-inch. That's because this is 1/2-inch 13 NC, 13 being the thread count per inch. It's called TPI. And this one here is 14 threads per inch, but the reason that it's so much wider is that this is NFT, or NPT, National Pipe Threading, and this one's NC, whatever that stands for. So NC is not what you want for this pipe fitting, which I hadn't realized whenever I bought it. So this one's the correct size. This one's 1/2-inch NPT National Pipe Thread, and this would fit right into it. And if you have any question about that, you can check the matching die that came with it, and if it's the same size, this should fit right in, and it does. It fits in very well. completely snug if you line it up properly, which I'm not going to do because there are other things to do right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go down there and start tapping that barrel. So I'm going to attempt to tap this barrel that I was using. The concept here is that the water comes in from outside, as has been shown, and it's going to come into that end right there and come down and fill the barrel. So whenever the barrel's full, then that tube will also get full, and then it'll overflow to this pipe, which will come down and go out there, and there's a drain there. So I have 2 barrels, and this is the first one, and the problem is that I used a hole saw to cut a hole in here, and then this was really loose in there, of course, so I used the same grommets that I had for the rest of what I'm doing here. But the problem is the grommet didn't make a good seal, and I'll explain why. If I can find one. Here's one. So this grommet it has maybe a 3/16 inch gap here, or maybe an 1/8, and that's supposed to go into the hole of some material, and then you stick the pipe through. Well, that didn't work because this material is probably, you can see here, it's about almost 1/4 of an inch thick. So that's a problem, because this isn't going to go through there and grip how it's supposed to, because it can't actually get through the other side to hold on to anything. So then it just falls out. So what I was doing was I trimmed part of this off, pushed it through, and then put caulking all over it, which might work, but it might not work, especially as the tank fills up and there's more and more pressure pushed against it. I'm not sure if that's going to hold very well, because I've expected the caulking to hold well in other situations in here, and it just ended up not working. So now I'm at the point of making a test hole into this barrel before I put it into my other and last barrel. I want to make sure that it works. So I'm going to go ahead and get moving on that. So I bought the 1/2 inch NPT bit, the tap, and unfortunately I don't have the right size drill bit for that, so I'm trying to use this thing here. It's you could say that it's working to a point, but it's really not the best case scenario. I don't even know if this will fit in here, but we're hopeful that it will. Cool. So I've drilled the first hole with that size because it's closer to what I need, but since it steps up to different sizes, it didn't go quite as deep as it needed to. So this one's just going to trim the back part. And the reason that I bought a 1/2 inch tap, because the 3/4 inch tap would have worked the same way if I had a 3/4 inch fitting. It was a little bit more expensive. I got the set of 3 taps and dies for $15 from Harbor Freight, which was an excellent deal. Everywhere that I've been looking at these taps, they want maybe $20 for just the tap. So I went with the pack of 3, and so I decided to do a 1/2 inch, and then I could step up from, you know, a 1/2 inch hole to a 3/4 inch pipe, for example here, so I could still use this thread and put it into the barrel and then use the thicker end for the 3/4 inch pipe. So the water flow wouldn't be as good as it could be, but I can save some money, and it doesn't really, I'm not in a situation where I need the water flow to be 100% maximum of what it could be. So here's my 1/2 inch tap, and I'm going to fit it into here. I don't want to mess up my other barrel, and I think pulling it out was a big problem that I should never have tried. So hopefully somebody can learn from my mistakes. So last night I came back and finished putting these taps in here, and I am very pleased to see that I have a 1/2 tank of water just in one night, thanks to this tap, which I did not put any kind of other sealant or anything in there. I just made the tap, screwed this in, and then connected some stuff here, including this ball valve. So the water right now is coming to right here, and the other end is right here. So I'll just be able to turn the valve, fill up my tank, where the fish will be soon. I need to get a little bit of stuff out of there that's fallen in, some dirt and things. And here was the old tank where I practiced my using the tap. See, it's so much better than just this grommet, which wasn't fitting in there completely because of how thick this is. So even though it was surprisingly hard to get out, it was sort of a mess. It just wasn't very well done. So over here, which I'm actually proud of this idea, over here the water drains in and comes, I made sure to make a little bit of a loop so that the water can sit in here and block airflow, because when it was just this funnel sitting here and water dripping down, or if I had the funnel sitting here with water dripping into that hole, then airflow would also be able to come through anytime there was no water. So by having this fill up with water, then there's no airflow going through, and whenever it rains, it'll just push that water down and fill up with new water. So I'm pretty happy about how that worked out, because blocking airflow is, well, really important so I can keep the heat in here in the winter. Especially it gets really cold sometimes, maybe -20, -30 with wind chill, and that's not something that I want getting in here. So I have the wire for the solar panels to come in, and it's a nice sunny day finally. Temperature outside is around 55. In here it's 70, 71. So I'm trying to keep some air from escaping. And sometime today, this side on the outside is taped. This side on the inside has caulking, but over time it's ripped apart just a little bit. Caulking apparently has almost no strength whatsoever. It's an adhesive, but if you pull apart, it'll just come right apart. So when the wind hits it, that's slowly happened, and I bought 2 boards that I'm going to cut in half, put one on one side, one on the other side, and screw them together to really make it a much better airtight seal, because as you can see, there are some places where air is getting out through the tape. When I first put it on there, it was pretty flush and nice and consistent, but over time, heating and cooling of the plastic, I guess, has stretched certain things faster than others, and so now there are little places where air can escape, So it has to escape through two spots. It has to go through the first layer and then the second layer, but it's really easy right there for it to pass the first layer, and it's pretty easy from all the different small holes on the outside to pass the second layer. So hopefully by screwing some boards together like I did on the outside, it will block the air much better. Even though it is keeping in heat more so than I would expect with that happening. And here's where I did it. Out here there's just this small board I've painted black, and there's a board on the inside, and they're screwed together, and that's keeping it pretty good. It's not watertight, it's not, you know, it's not keeping everything out, but it's doing a much better job than just tape or just really anything else. And here's another example of this caulking. I tried to put caulking on there and push it together thinking, oh, that will stay there, but that's not the case. Even though the wind hardly even moves this, it's pulled right apart from this plastic. It is not sealing this plastic whatsoever. It just pulls right apart. So maybe that's common knowledge for some people, but it wasn't for me. It's just like that. This foam here, if you put the foam on this plastic, it'll pull right apart. So you need to find some other method of holding two sheets of plastic together. Tape seems to work, but then tape also makes little grooves for the air to pass through. So I'm going to put a screw maybe every 6 inches to a foot, and hopefully that'll keep the air from passing through. So last night I positioned this solar panel mostly in the dark because my flashlight died, but I had another little light. So what I've done here is I've taken 2 skids that were extras from something else and put 2 like door hinges on there so it can just be propped up. I had to find true south, and I'll put a link on how to do that exactly, because there's no reason for me to talk about it very much. I'm sure you'd get a much better explanation from the link that I used. But anyway, you find true south, you point your solar panel long ways toward true south, and then you have to think about the angle at which you need to point your solar panel, and I'll put another link for that so you can see, you know, which angle you should use, because really there's a way to calculate the angle of the panel, and there's a way to calculate the angle of, you know, the direction of true south. For me, it's basically right in that direction. Magnetic south is maybe right there. It's a 10 degrees difference from where I'm at, but you'll see how to calculate that by visiting the links that I'll post. So there's probably better ways to do this. You can find videos on YouTube or anywhere on how to position your solar panel, but and to make a frame, but I just use these 2 skids. So now all I have to do is prop it up at the right angle, and anytime I need to, whether it's 2 times a year, 4 times a year, whatever, I can just lower it, raise it, and then prop it up with something else. So from where I'm at, I need a 53-degree angle. The angle is from wherever it's pivoting. So looking at this solar panel, true south is that way, so the angle is going to be in here. You know, as the panel lifts and drops, it's going to be this angle. For me is 53 degrees, so I need to measure out 53 degrees right here. It is 88 degrees in here and 45 degrees outside, so something is working right. I got this solar panel. It's 3.5 watts, 6-volt solar panel to use with a small air pump right here. This is a 3 to 6 volt DC air pump. So the panel during the day is going to run the pump, and I didn't want it to run constantly because there's no reason for the fish to need good aeration to do a lot of movement at night. So I was hoping at night they would just sort of get a little sleepier and more tired. During the day they could be fast little fish or whatever they want to do. So I got this. I have two little aerators, one right there and one over here. This one started floating. It's the suction didn't hold it for very long, but that's fine. I can use a rock to hold that down later. So I'm going to put the pump here, and this solar panel is going to go outside, and the wire is going to go through the same PVC pipe that the other solar panel is going through, which goes to the battery. I also didn't want them to use the same solar panel in case there was some problem with the wiring or the other connections that caused them to short circuit or something to blow up, and then I wouldn't be able to keep my fish alive, so I didn't want that to happen either. So I thought it would be best to just have a little separate apparatus here to give the fish air. I made this little wooden frame. I had just a short piece of wood, 2x2, and I cut it into 6 little slats, and I put it together into this so it can sit on the back of the skid with the solar panel. That way when I adjust that solar panel, I'll also be adjusting this solar panel for the optimum intake of the sunshine, or however the solar panel works. So I've sawed off the sides so that it can evenly rest against the other solar panel, and there are a lot of cracks here that will hold water, these edges and stuff. So what I'm going to do is use some of this silicone gasket maker. It says on the tube it's just a sealant. I thought for sure it said gasket maker, but anyway, I'm going to put some in the cracks and spread it out so that the sunlight can dry up whatever water's on top, and so that the water won't find its way down into the cracks and rot the wood and rust everything else that's in here. I believe the top of the panel is waterproof as long as it doesn't get scratched, but as far as the back has positive and negative terminals that I've taped over, but that doesn't necessarily make them watertight. So I want to keep it face up and prevent water from coming down into the cracks. And then I'll put it outside with my other panel. I took one of these scrap pieces of wood and used it to make a frame for that small solar panel. I've attached this small solar panel here with 4 screws, and it's not going to withstand a lot of force, but it's very small, so it's not going to trap a lot of wind or anything. That should be sufficient to hold it, I would think. So now I'm going to make a small hole here where I have the other end of the PVC and feed the wire up through for the large solar panel and for the smaller one. This is a 30-foot cord, and it has the attachments, the ends that I can attach on here. So rather than getting 2 cords, I just thought I would get one twice as long and cut it, because the other end goes into the charge controller anyway, so I can't use these kinds of ends on it. So if I had bought 2 cables, they would have this, and I just have to cut one end off anyway. gonna put all the wires down through this lower skid here, in case for some reason I ever push down the top and lay it flat. I don't want any of my cords to get damaged, so I need to make sure that it goes down through here, and I'll have to be careful if I ever lay this down to make sure this goes downward rather than onto one of these sides and getting crimped or anything. That pipe ends right here, so I'm gonna put a little hole here and push it up through. And I have good news, or at least I think so. I recreated the bell siphon. So this is a new piece of a soda bottle, and over here's the bottom of a Gallagher's milk jug or bottle. And I just got a little bit fancy with cutting the little holes here on the side. You know, it's like when I was doing this, I thought it's like a race car having race stripes on it or flames or something. It doesn't actually make it go faster. It's just, it makes you feel like it's going faster. So I just put that on there for really no reason, but I have discovered the reason that it wasn't working before, and that's the important part here. So before, I was using this big soda bottle bottom, and the problem was you could see how much space there is in here. So the smaller bottle inside takes like maybe 2/3 of the space in here, and the rest of it's just air. And that's not good, because the more air you have here, the harder it's going to be for the vacuum to pull it all out. And the idea is to have a small amount of air in here and the rest of it filling up with water, so that the suction and everything can just, it'll pull it down there so much easier. And I only have this really thin tube that's bringing it down. So basically I need to, if you only have a little bit of tube, or it's really thin or something, it's not going to draw the water down, it's not going to pull the air down. You need just a little bit of space in there rather than a lot of extra space that's just air. It doesn't serve any purpose. So once the water level rises, the pressure inside builds, and eventually it all starts to go down the tube. And that was the point. And I put a little caulking in here too, because when I was getting the other piece of plastic bottle out, it got all wrinkled and disgusting, so I tried to pull it out and it cracked the bottom of this dish pan. So there you have it. Bell siphon. And I'm gonna now allow all the water to come back into here. And I'll actually demonstrate it in action. So, in order to do that, I also decided to lay this last dish pan flat. All the others are tilted a little bit so that the roots can be out of the water more, but this one is laying flat now, so that this is laying flat and everything's laying flat. Alright, so with that in place, unfortunately, since it's not clear, we won't be able to see it, but we'll be able to hear it working. Let's see, what's the best way to do this? I would say like that. Because I don't want it to pop up. PVC probably would not pop up because it's heavier than plastic, but this is just a little bit of plastic that's thin, trapping a lot of air, so it's very buoyant. Okay, so now that that's done, I need to push these two back together quick, because when I tilted them they pulled apart a little bit. to do two things. First, I'm going to dump this back in here. The tube that I have running from the bottom of the bell siphon is very thin, and I don't need it to be thicker because I don't need this to drain very quick. Water's not going to be filling it up very fast, and the water that does go in, it's going to be from one tower into this one tower into that one, and so on. So it will have time to even out and level out between the different dish pans here. So I didn't need it to work really fast. So while those are evening out, I'm going to cut this tube down here. And that's another reason that it might not work. You need this to be mostly downhill. It certainly can't be any higher than the level of your of the pump or the bell siphon or whatever you call it. So you need it to be going downhill, and I'm going to cut this right here. I don't want any water to sit in that pipe, or else it's going to, if any water's sitting in there, it's just going to take more pressure for it to start working. And I want it to make it easier to start rather than harder to start. So now that that's off, everything's downhill and, you know, a downward slope. So I'm going to give this what it needs, and we should be able to hear it start up. I'll dump this one in there. I had to put a lot of water out of the fish tank, so I ended up filling up everything else that I had with the water from the fish tanks. Alright, that might be enough. I didn't hear it start working, but I heard the trickle of the water, and there it is. It's coming out from the pump. So that's very exciting for me. Not only is that giving a little bit of oxygen into the water here, so if there's some other kind of big problem, maybe the fish will still be able to survive. But it's very exciting because I'm sort of using non-traditional materials. I've never seen anyone use a tube like this, so it can work. A lot of the other videos say, oh, you need to have a 3/4 inch gap over here, you need a 3/4 inch gap above. That's not true. You just need there to be enough room for the water to flow over the edge, and you need to have as little really extra room as possible, with the exception of the place for the water to flow in. And then as the water builds around it, the pressure will increase, and eventually it'll start working. Just make sure that there's not a lot of water sitting in your line already, because then that'll make it not work, or it'll be more difficult for it to start. It's my first time to see this pump actually working. I set it up 2 nights ago, and I've been busy during the day since then. So I have two different bubbling ends, whatever you want to call them. So this one here It looks like it might take extra force in order to actually get air to go through it. And this one here, it looks like it has almost no resistance whatsoever. So the bubbles are just flying out of this thing, and it's certainly giving a lot more aeration to this water than the other side. And it looks like it actually is floating. Yeah, it moved the rocks off of itself. I had two little rocks on there, but anyway, it's staying submerged, so that's good. This pump, it was a 3 to 6 volt pump. I got it on eBay. Took a while to get here, straight from China, and I just made this little housing out of an Ensure bottle just because I didn't want it to get wet. So as you can see, I have my plus and minus up here onto the terminals. Maybe you can see that. And it's really going at it. And I didn't want water to drip on it, so that's really the reason I did that. And I have it coming out the bottom, and it goes through here, not really for any purpose other than to help hold it there in position. I don't want it to fall. I was going to put it over here, but I don't want it to fall in the water if something were to happen or get caught on something. So my 1, 2, 3, 4. I see 4 of my fish in there. And I brought some things down here that I was using up at the house. And here's one. This organic digester, which seeds beneficial bacteria into your water source. So since a lot of my water came from just rainwater, it's not going to have this type of stuff in there. So I need to make sure I put a little bit in here. This bottle's supposed to treat 10,000 gallons. So you can imagine what a small amount I'm going to need for maybe roughly 30 to 40 gallons. So I'm just going to use a cap full, and that should be enough. So the reason that I chose black was I want it to absorb sunlight and absorb heat a little bit, and I don't want it to reflect a lot of sunlight, which white or lighter colors would do, because the more you have reflecting sunlight, the more your bacteria is going to be killed. You don't want your bacteria to be killed, because the bacteria is what keeps your water clean. It's what helps your plants get the nutrients they need from the fish waste. It's just not something that you want to keep killing. I've seen some people with their aquaponic setup use an ultraviolet light sterilizer, and that's really counterproductive for what you're trying to do here. You don't want sterile water. You want well, unless you're trying to drink it or something, but if you want your stuff to grow, you need it to be thriving and be it circulating around and, you know, doing what it does. And if you're killing it all with a sterilizer, then you're just going to slow down progress for yourself, and that's not really something that you would want. So that's definitely something to look more into if you're thinking about doing something like that. You want to make sure that it's not going to harm the things that you need. I don't know why you would use it for something like this, but anyway. So I used the organic digester in there, which will help clear out the water and keep things from getting clogged as much. Another thing that I did was I bought some black fish aquarium gravel. Let's see if you can see in there. I filled it up about this far, put a whole bunch of holes into it with a construction knife, and I put a screwdriver in there and just wiggle it around a little bit to open the crack a little bit. So what this is going to do is, I looked at a lot of different videos online of how to make a floating biofilter, but this one seems to be just as good as what I need, and without a whole bunch of extra waste. Some of them want you to buy a pump, buy this, buy that, rig up some little contraption that floats around and it has an air pump dedicated to it. I don't think that's really necessary. Of course, I have a smaller setup here than a lot of people would, but this is going to do what I need to, I think. Allow the bacteria to survive because the sunlight can hit it as well. It might get a little bit light in there, but it's not going to be thick enough to block all the sunlight, but that's really not a big deal. I just need it to move around, take the bacteria to the different places around the water. Maybe eventually I'll just move it to this side and, you know, let these fish get some. But since these are two connected, usually the way something works is you go from an area of higher pressure or higher intensity or higher anything, higher concentration, and that mixes with an area of lower concentration. So inside this bottle, where the bacteria is really strong and heavy and has a good place to live, and it's going to be breaking everything down in there, that water is going to be coming out because of the lower concentration of the things the bacteria wants inside after they consume it all. So basically, you know, higher concentration, lower concentration, they're going to be constantly mixing. It's not going to happen super quick, but that's why we put a bunch of holes in there, so it can happen as fast as it needs to. So that way, neither tank should ever become to the point where there's too much waste that the fish are harmed. I just thought about something here. So if I wanted this side, being that they have different amounts of resistance, if I want this side to pump heavier, all I would need to do is block the amount of air coming into this line a little bit. So if I squeeze it here, you should see that side to start pumping heavier. So let's try it. Squeeze. And now there's a whole lot of air coming out over here and less air coming out over here. And as I release, you can see the difference. So if I took a clothespin or something, you know, temporarily, just to sort of even out the flow of oxygen here a little bit, I could do that. And later, if I want more on one side, or if I change the little aeration device down there at the bottom, I could easily just take that clothespin off and it would be even again. So I don't want much oxygen in this bottle, is what I'm getting at. So what I'm going to do is just let it sink over here, and it'll fill up with water. All the oxygen will be gone. Over time, as the bacteria in there starts to eat stuff and the anaerobic bacteria slowly multiplies, becomes really dominant, then whatever oxygen's in there, it's going to slowly turn into whatever gas is released whenever bacteria break stuff down. I don't know what that gas is, but it's probably not going to remain air, oxygenated air. So the longer I leave it in there, the less of it ends up being oxygen, and the greater that the anaerobic bacteria can survive. So my other filter is going to be based on aerobic bacteria. So it's going to have a lot of aeration. It's going to be out in the open, so you know, water will pass over it. Bacteria can get the water and the stuff it needs to break down, and it'll just carry it away and bring in new water and carry it away. So it's going to be cycling through and making my water clear and helping the plants get what they need. It's also important to mention that bacteria, you know, both kinds are sort of going to live throughout the water system. They're going to live in the bucket, they're going to live in these grow beds, especially when there's gravel and stuff for them to hide under, and it's all going to still be there. But the reason that you make a biofilter is that it provides convenient, efficient, it's a really nice habitat. It's really, it provides well for that bacteria. So I want it to be easy for them to live. I don't want them to have to stay in the shadows here or start floating around and not be able to make a good colony. I want the bacteria to have a really nice place to colonize and really become a good consumer. I want it to be as efficient as possible. So even though that bacteria is going to be all over the place, it's going to mainly be able to survive in that filter there that I made. And another place the other filter is going to also be a good place for other bacteria to live. So here I'm going to turn this little compartmentalized container that you can buy from a store, usually like in the fishing section or something like that, maybe some sort of craft section. I'm going to turn this into a small incubator for seeds. Some people would use 2 containers similar to this, or really any shape I suppose, with a black bottom. They would sprinkle some seeds in here, spray them with a spray bottle twice a day, and cover them so that no light can come in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to block the sunlight from coming into here so that the seeds will germinate. So here's a little update on the seed situation. First of all, I got a new water bottle, new spray bottle. This was from the dollar store. It's an excellent spray bottle. The top's clear so you can see if something's plugging it up. And when you screw off this part, you can see how there's this circular area here where the water actually passes through. So if anything got stuck in here, all I would have to do is take that off and maybe squeeze this and shoot some air through there and it would unclog. Whereas this other spray bottle, which was obviously not meant for this, it got clogged the first day, and you can't really screw this off. This is one where it has like an on-off switch here at the front. It doesn't come off, so I couldn't see what was clogging it up, but something was clogging it up, which is what I sort of thought would happen anyway. But so at the dollar store I got this nice food safe number 2 HDPE bottle, which has some pretty convenient measurements on the side, and it's basically exactly what I was looking for in a spray bottle for this. So with that out of the way, here is my compost tub. It's a source of cheap heat with no electricity. No things can go wrong and mess up your project, none of that stuff. You just need a place to put your green matter and your brown matter, or your leafy stuff and your organic carbon-based stuff. So these are some leaves off of Brussels sprouts. There's some pine cones and some sticks and some cardboard. I put a lot of the bigger stuff on the bottom so that whenever I mix it later on, I won't be hitting big chunks of wood. They will eventually decompose, but it'll take some time. So I don't want to be dealing with that while trying to mix this stuff up. And for my boxes, you can use cardboard. You can use anything that'll break down, but you don't want to use any kind of meat or something like from an animal. The only exception being chicken egg shells. I mostly tore the tape off, but see this kind of tape here, there's some thin plastic strands, at least they look like plastic, and then this is some sort of cardboard coated with a thin layer of plastic. It should break down, except for maybe these strands. It might take a long time, but they're not going to really get in the way. But any kind of other plastic or anything like this, that's usually the tape you'd see on a box, you'd want to tear that off. So that's going to be my source of heat, because whenever the bacteria decomposes that matter in there, it's going to create heat. And there are different types of bacteria that start working and stop working at different internal temperatures. So I have a door here that's going to allow plenty of air to get in there. You want to keep it lots of air. You want to keep it aerobic. If it goes to anaerobic, it starts to stink. It starts to get moldy. It starts to basically not be good compost. And there are plenty of resources on how to actually make good compost, so there are more qualified people to actually tell you about that. But this is my solution for for almost effortless heat. And it'll produce the most heat for the first few days and slowly taper down, you know, over a period of like 5 or 6 months, depending on the size of your pile, depending on the materials inside. And you definitely don't want to go too big, because they say after 13 by 13 by 13 feet, anything bigger than that can spontaneously combust because of how hot it gets inside. A smaller pile might make just a little bit of heat. This seems like, to me, if I fill that thing up as much as I can, it's going to be about a medium-sized pile. It should produce heat for several months. That's what I'm looking for. And anytime I need a little boost of heat, say if we get a lot of snow or something, because this is the northeast USA, we do get a good bit of snow. So before a storm like that or anything, I'll just come down here and stir up the pile and get it to start working hard again and getting higher temperatures to really help offset these cold fronts that'll be coming through here anytime, really. It's the middle of November, so that's really a concern here in the near future. What I like about this, the main reason that this is a really cool idea, other than not needing electricity and producing heat, is that as long as I don't put any kind of crazy stuff in there, like any kind of meat or anything that's too big to break down, this will produce some really good soil. I also threw a little bit of soil in there that I collected some worms and put them in there too. The worms will help break everything down. That's really what I want. I want it to be some good healthy soil, so whenever outdoor growing time comes around again, I'll not only have heat from this thing, but I'll also have some nice soil. You don't want to use anything synthetic like Miracle-Gro or any of that kind of stuff. You can look more about that, but what I'm interested in is some nice soil. It's not going to be necessarily organic, because I threw a few different scraps in there, like some small pieces of plywood and other things which do compost. But you don't want a lot of it, or I don't want a lot of it. I want it to still be some decent stuff for the ground. But you know, it is what it is. It's not perfect, but it's really sort of a secondary focus. Of course, the main focus is going to be growing something good and healthy out of this and the other towers, but that's sort of a secondary project that's going to help this one stay afloat. Last night I started wiring this up. I was able to finish this container holder, tank holder. I guess there's really no specific name for it, since I just sort of made it. But the idea is that the pump, which will be here, pumps the water up to there, and then it can trickle down through the different grow towers from this PVC pipe, which has the 4-way valve on the end. So after that, I was wiring this up in the dark with a headlamp on, and here I set my battery here. I got it off the ground, you know, let air get through there so that things don't decompose as fast. And I sort of gave it a sturdy little perch there. I don't really need that space for anything else, but I left it here for this type of reason. That's why I didn't knock all this out. When I was digging the hole, I thought maybe I could use the corner space for something. So everything seems to be hooked up right. These two go to the solar panel, 2 for the battery, and 2 for the load. And of course, on the load, on the positive line, we would want a fuse, so I wired that in there, and then everything else is connected to the fuse. And here's my temperature controller, which is telling me the temperature of the air. At first, I wanted to make this line really long and just have it going over into the fish tank, but that seemed like a waste of wire. So then what I decided was, it would be a much better idea just to, whenever I I'm curious about the temperature in there, I can just take a little bit of water over here and do just that. And this temperature thermometer measures in Celsius, so I need to get some conversions. I could have found one maybe in Fahrenheit, but as soon as I learn what the normal values are for this, I'll have a pretty good idea of the temperature. So there's the thermometer. Right now it's reading 17 degrees Celsius. That's pretty cold. I'm not sure what that translates to, but it's still livable for fish anyway. It's not freezing, of course. And up here I have my timer relay. So at the moment power is coming to this relay terminal, and whenever it switches over after 361 more seconds, power will be up here, and that's the one I'll be running to my pump. So it'll be on for that time and then off for whatever time I set. And over here is the photo sensor. So during daylight this will be getting power. At nighttime it will not be getting power, and that's important to me because I don't want to run a lot of energy at night. I assume the plants won't be needing a lot of water at night, and there will be water already on their roots for them to absorb for a while anyway. It'll take them a while to get dry. So I decided to save some battery power, never knowing if I'll have some really dark days or anything where I won't get a lot of sunlight. There's really no reason just to have it running all night. So when this is no longer picking up sunlight, it'll just kill the power to this, and this is what powers the pump. So that seems to, in theory, it's a pretty good concept. Down here I wired in some lights, just a strip. They're red, which I didn't know when I bought them. I buy a lot of my things off of eBay, and some of it comes straight from China, and some of the English isn't translated very well. It's really up to whatever the seller can use to translate something from Chinese to English. So maybe I missed it, or maybe it wasn't there. In the picture it was a strip of white lights, but these are clearly red. So I'm just gonna have to deal with that. Let's see, this has been staying at 17 for a while, so I'm gonna go ahead and take this out of here. So 17 degrees Celsius. I'll see what that translates to in Fahrenheit. And this other switch is if I want to run my pump manually. It has a float valve, or a float switch on it, but it also has, I'll show you the pump. Okay, it has 3 wires here. One, of course, is neutral, a black wire. This white and brown wire is supposed to be the switch, this float switch in there. So whenever the water makes it float up, then it's gonna have power to pump out some water. And on this other terminal, this one here, this brown wire is supposed to be if I have a manual switch like I put in there. So that manual switch is gonna go to this brown wire. This is the only one that's labeled. I had to look at a wiring diagram to see what the other two were for, but this one says connect to positive only. So this one's going to be through a switch, and then this one's going to be to my cycle timer relay there, and then the black one, of course, goes to negative. It's going to go straight to here, negative on the load of the controller. When I was wiring this up, I didn't have a very good way of connecting one of these circuits. And this circuit is a motion sensor, and the idea is that during daylight that timer will be running. But during the nighttime, there's a terminal where I could add something else to be working at night. So I decided I would get this motion sensor, and I'll hook up a little LED diode to it, so that if I walk in here at night, I'll just have one little LED flip on. That'll be enough to see the ground and see where I'm stepping, and then I can find my way to that strip of LED lights there to turn that on if I need to. But at first I tried to solder. There's very small little leads off of this. I'll pull one of these wires off to show what they look like. See, it's only maybe probably a ½ inch or even a little bit less than that, and I bent them down so that I could put this up there with everything else. So I got these. I needed a better way than soldering, because the solder is sort of hard to control with a little soldering iron, and it just wasn't working out too well. This is a tight space. So what I did was I got these off of eBay for $2 or $3. It's just a bunch of little wire cables with pins. I forget what they're called exactly, but one end is male and one end is female. So it's going to make it a lot easier just to plug these wires in. And I'm going to wire that up there right now. And then here's my little diode. I have some diodes that I got a while back. It's 2.6 volts, and that circuit up there, the load on it, the load off of this motion detector is 3 volts. So hopefully it won't burn out my diode. I guess that's a possibility. But it's not too high above. If it doesn't kick on for a long time, I think it will be alright. That's just something I'll have to see. And then this other thing around it that's really shiny and reflective, I got out of an old flashlight. So I put in my own diode from one of these, and it's going to help direct the light in one direction rather than losing some light off in other directions. So that's all going to get connected up there. So here you can see I put this pipe through here, and I connected up a couple fittings so that it now comes up through the bottom of that dish pan. So whenever the water level comes up, it'll also rise in there, and it'll stay level with these two tanks, which are totes, but I'm using them as water tanks in my aquarium. So inside I have this Seaflow bilge pump. It says it's 750 gallons per hour, 12 volt, 3 amps, and it has a float valve inside. So as the water level comes up, anytime that it has power from my infinite looping timer relays, anytime it has power and the water level kicks it on, it'll pump water up to there, to the tank up above, which is up there. I just used a handle from one of the buckets here to sort of attach it to that board going across. It's not very sturdy, but when you think about how much water is going to be in this pipe here, it's not going to be very heavy at all. It's just 3/4 inch pipe and a couple feet of it, maybe a little over a meter. And I'm breathing heavy because I was just jogging. So don't mind that too much. So now I need to put the PVC pipe that comes out of this bilge pump and goes up there into the bucket. This bilge pump is rated as having a 9-foot head, which means it will pump water up to 9 feet vertically. But that's sort of an issue for me because the height there between where it's going to be coming out of the pump and that tank up at the top is around 9 feet. Since it has a 3/4 inch diameter output there on the pump, what I'm thinking is, see this 3/4 inch pipe here, It's going to go over top of that, and I'll jam some putty in there since it's probably not going to fit very snug and it would leak a lot. So I'll put some of that NSF certified putty there, and then I have this combo check valve, which is a one-way valve. So basically it'll be coming from the pump, going up here, going through this check valve, so that nothing up here is able to go backwards down through the valve back into the tub or the dish pan. But anyway, so this pipe from here up to the top will be full of water all the time, assuming this works correctly and nothing clogs it or anything, or holds open the little flap that opens. So the water's pumped up inside, the flap opens, and then it closes again, sort of like how your toilet works in the back. And so once I get that going, hopefully it'll pump it that high. And the reason that, see, this is a 3/4 inch check valve, so I had to use a 3/4 inch PVC with it, but I'm going to use a fitting and a bushing to bring this down to a 1/2 inch, because I'm thinking that I'll be able to get a couple more feet of head out of this if it's not holding as much water. It'll be easier for the pump to push it up there. It'll be a slower flow, but I'm not too concerned about that. And the reason is, this pipe here is a 1/2 inch. That means everything flooding into this dish pan here is coming through a 1/2 inch. So really, if this was any wider, if this was 3/4 of an inch, it just wouldn't be enough to fill it anyway. It's like I wouldn't have enough feeding into this to actually get it to going the same speed through here. So basically I'm stepping down rather than stepping up, so that both these pipes have the same diameter and allow the same throughput. So that's what I'm doing right now, and I'll check back whenever it's finished. Actually, I might just fit this up right now on video, just in case somebody wants a better visualization of what's happening here. So here's the pump. It's inside of this. There's the float valve, so it kicks on. If it has power, then it comes on, and here comes the water. And it just gets sucked up through this thing here. You can see that there's like 3 little things there. I guess they spin around and create a good suction. So it just comes apart real easy and back together pretty easy. There's 3 tabs on it that you push, and it comes right off. So I need to sit it in here, but I need to make sure the water level stays below where these wires go into it. I went ahead and put a little bit of this sealant. It's called Super Clear RTV silicone. It is not food safe, so I want to make sure the water level doesn't reach there. I guess it wouldn't be too big of a tragedy because this is such a small amount. And if you use, I'm trying to use food safe stuff as much as possible. There are a couple places where it was just impossible, or I couldn't get a food safe plastic, or you know, I don't know if these rubber grommets are food safe. So, but you know, I'm just doing the best that I can with it. There are plenty of pollutants in the environment that are doing your body worse than a little bit of this kind of thing. If you think about, you know, everybody knows that arsenic is bad for you. Well, there's a good bit of it in white rice, and a lot of people stress over just these tiny little pollutants that are in their air or in their water that end up being less than what you actually eat with some white rice. And I'm sure other things are the same way. Maybe chickens have, you know, bad things in their feed, or cows, or anything like that. So it's hard to say whether everything's completely healthy or safe for you to eat. But I'm doing I think a really good job. I've used food safe plastic almost everywhere, and every tube is rated for potable water, and everything like that. So I think I'm checking what I'm doing pretty thoroughly. So I'm going to go ahead and see how this actually fits up in here before I start talking about anything else. It slides through. It's not a snug fit, so what I'm going to do is wrap this in putty and jam it up through there and let it harden so it'll be a good watertight seal. Maybe you can see it through there, maybe you can't if I'm not hitting the right angle, but yeah, it just slides right in. So I'm going to put a little elbow on here and then that check valve. I'll do that right now after I grab my different sealants here. So here's the elbow over here. Just gonna wipe it off on my shirt. It's a little bit dirty. And alright, looks good. So in case you've never done this before, or if you just want to see me do it for some reason, you can get a 2-in-1 can of primer and cement, but I just got the separate cans. I think it's better to mix them, and it's sort of more fun to paint on the purple stuff and then paint it over with the white glue. And it's sort of, it makes this boring process sort of interesting and, you know, a little bit artistic, I guess you could say, to do something like this every now and then. Well, I didn't even need to do that side. That's okay. In fact, I can use this on the other spot, then I don't end up having it glued where it doesn't need to be glued. So here's this stuff. It has a pretty strong smell. It smells like alcohol or something of that nature. So here's one. Geez, the smell, it's even getting in my mouth as I'm standing here. And now it's on my hands, which I don't like to do. So that's in there pretty snug. Oh! Whew. I'm just going to stop talking for a minute because it's getting in my mouth and everything, so I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing without talking so much. The instructions actually say you're supposed to prime it once, prime it again, and then use the cement, and you do that with both ends, the fitting or the other end or whatever you're putting together. But I think if you wait that long, you're not going to be able to put them together because of how they work. They're not actually like glues, they actually expand and cause the pipe to be expanded onto the other one, so it's like gripping it really tight, but it's not actually sticking so much. Though it is a little bit sticky, but that's not the main way of how it works. So it's getting sort of dark in here. Let's let in a little bit more light. So now you can see what it looks like. So here we have the bottom, down here where the pump will be attached. Then up here's the check valve. Then up here's where it is transitioned to a smaller pipe. 3/4 inch, 3/4 inch, 3/4 to 1/2 inch, and then the rest of the pipe will be a 1/2 inch going up into the top. Over here you can see my my wiring, and it just switched over to being dark, and there the light sensor came on, so the motion sensor. So something worked. I'm pretty excited about that. Japanese person might say, "Yatta!" Here's a little update on the weather situation. Today it's 39 degrees. This is about the warmest part of the day. And in here it is 62, which is a good growing condition. Maybe not perfect, but it's decent enough. It's much better than 39 degrees. So I finally had everything wired up and I started up the pump, which ran for a few seconds, and then I shut it off. But a few seconds later I tried it again and it didn't work. So as you can see here, here's my pump, and it says it uses 3 amps and I should use a 6 amp fuse. And before I had a 5 amp fuse. And then up here is my check valve, which is a combo valve. It actually takes a good bit of force to push water through there. And then I have a fitting that steps down from 3/4 inches to a 1/2 inch, and it goes up there, and then it changes back to 3/4 inches because I had a bunch of fittings that I wanted to use. So rather than buying new fittings for a 1/2 inch pipe, I just stepped it back up to 3/4. Didn't really matter. Any size is going to be fine as long as it's not smaller than what my pipe is. So basically, whenever I started up the pipe, it worked for a second, and after a few seconds it stopped working. So I'm led to believe that the fuse blew that I wired in here, and it did. See, I have a fuse. Everything runs after this fuse, just in case I don't want everything to get burned up. So that's the point behind that. And anyway, it did exactly what it was supposed to. I wasn't sure exactly at first what the problem was. So I took out the motion sensor because, to be honest, it really wasn't doing very much. I wanted to wire it in there just to see if I could do it, just to see if it worked. It only was powering one little LED. It really didn't give off much light. It wasn't practical, more or less. So I went ahead and took that out just in case it had something to do with the issue. And then I found out that after using a 7.5 amp fuse, it still blew. So what I'm led to believe now is that this pump, which is rated for 9 feet head, which means 9 feet vertical of pumping water at its diameter, which is 3/4 of an inch, I believe that it's already trying as hard as it can, to pump the water that high. Now, having a thinner pipe is going to help because there's going to be less water in the pipe, which means it's going to require less force for the water to be pushed up to the top. But this combo drive, this is requiring extra force. Not a combo drive, but a combo valve, a check valve or one-way valve, whatever you want to call it. It requires a good bit of force, and then it's reaching almost its maximum 9 feet of head. So I believe that's just requiring too much energy for the pump to pump out that much, or to use up that much electricity. So what I did was I bought some pieces, some 3/4 inch pieces mostly, and I'm going to change this. I'm going to saw it off there, get rid of the check valve, and I'm going to let the water drain back down in here after it's done pumping. I didn't want that at first because I didn't want my pump to be completely submerged. I went ahead and sealed it up where the wires go into the pump, just in case that it does become submerged. But the idea is that it's going to pump up the water, and I don't want anything else. I don't want the water to stay in the line, because if this is full of water with the check valve there, and this starts up right at the very beginning, it's going to have all that force. It needs to push the water up here and up, and you need to push all this water that's already there up. So if it drains out whenever it's done, then it'll just be pushing only the new water up there, basically. There will be no water in that line. I believe that's why it ran the first time, because it could provide enough force without using too many amps of electricity. It had enough force to push the water up with just air in there. But now it's trying to get through the combo valve. It's trying to get through this much, this is full of water, so it's trying to push that up too. It's just requiring more force, and the pump's trying to use too many amps, which is why the fuse blew. So I'm gonna cut that out and just use a 1/2-inch pipe the whole way up for the most part, and hopefully that will solve my problem. If it still blows with the 7.5 amp fuse, then that's going to be a big problem, but hopefully it won't. Hopefully it won't. And even better, I'll try a 5 amp fuse to see if that works, because the lower the fuse, sort of the safer it's going to be. The higher the fuse, the more likely that you're going to burn up something important before the fuse blows. So I don't want that to happen. I don't want to have to buy a new pump, though I will if I have to. It was $17 on eBay. I believe the same pump from the manufacturer was $25, give or take. And by the way, so whenever I was changing some water here, I decided to fill up these trays because they actually hold a considerable amount of water all put in together. Just one, you would think, oh well, not very much, but there's a few gallons here, and I needed to drop the water level there so I could put caulking around the pipe to make it more watertight. One of them eventually started leaking, so I used that food safe caulking, and I filled up this so I could lower the water level in the other side. And I took off this part of my bell siphon, which is what I showed you before. If you watch the whole rest of this video, in another clip I showed you sort of what this looked like just sitting there, but I didn't show you what it looked like on the inside. It's just the bottom of a little milk container. I think it was around a quart maybe, but anyway, this is what it looked like after I remade it. So this one's nice and flush with the water level here, which is the important thing. At first I had it flush with the tilt, but now I have it with water level. So if I were to push this down over here, it would create suction and a vacuum, and all this water would slowly drain out. It takes almost a half hour because of how thin my tube is running out of there. It's a pretty thin tube, so when you're taking several gallons through that tube, it does take some time. But that's fine for me. If you need something thicker, then go thicker. But it didn't matter to me if it took a half hour for this to drain or how much time it took, because the water coming in here is not going to ever overflow, because it's never going to be pumping up and draining too much water at a time. So if this takes a while, that's fine. So maybe later I'll show you what happens when I push this down, but you can find that online, as I've mentioned before. I just wanted to show you what mine looks like, and of course I have these little slits cut in there. I think I said something about racing stripes before, or flames or something. Yeah, that's the whole reason that's there. I could have just cut some lines, or holes or anything that allows some water through. I just wanted to make it look sort of a little fancier. So that's where I am at this point, and everything else other than replacing that a little bit. And I'm back. So I just filled this up. As you can see, the water level's higher here, and it disturbed everything inside. So shortly, when there's a circulation, even if it's slow, all this stuff that's in here should be sucked out, and it'll end up next to the pump, and I don't want it to clog the pump, so I have a solution for that as well. But you can see that this water is much clearer than this water, because it comes here, the circulation, the flow of water comes into here first, and then to there, so it all eventually makes its way over here. So I know that eventually it's going to make its way into the pump. So I looked around a little bit more. And because all of this water is still up here, this water is not rising enough in order to bring this up yet. So it'll just take some time, and during the normal cycle, when the pump's not running for 30 minutes, it'll be enough time for this to fill up. I might end up putting some more water into it, but I don't want to do too much because the water will pump up, and then when it shuts off, you know, the float valve is deactivated because the water level gets low. Everything that's in here will drain back into this. So I don't want that to happen and have it overflow, because eventually I would lose too much water, or it would stop bringing water over here. So as that's coming back down into the fish tanks, I'm just going to give it a few minutes, and in fact I'm going to help it a little bit by just taking scoops of water out of here. Once this is all set up how I want it and running the proper way, then I won't have to do anything like this. But I'm still in the trial stages of everything, so. And some of these things that I'm doing I haven't seen done before. For example, many of the grow beds that I see on videos online, they're using really huge grow beds, lots of water, very large, different kinds of medium, and usually their grow beds are full of the medium. But I have a sort of a different solution around that. I don't want to buy a whole bunch of medium. I don't want to use huge tanks of water. I think that really all the water does, it's a vessel. I mean, the plants use a little bit of it, but the water really just transports waste from the fish, you know, fish to bacteria to the plants. So as long as it's able to pass around, it doesn't need to be high pressure, it doesn't need to be, you know, this huge supply of it. And I think that doing this a more conservative way like I'm doing is just as good, maybe a little bit more efficient even, and certainly more controllable than having huge grow beds and huge everything. There's really no need for it all. But I did make this room a little bit larger than it needs to be, and that's because, well, for two reasons. I didn't want to be cramped in here all the time. It's 11 by 16 feet at the top, and then it's slanted on the way down, so there's no exact measurement for what the bottom space is, but the top's 11 by 16 feet, knowing that that slope would be there. And you might think this room's too big for what it is, but yeah, I didn't want to be cramped. I knew I wanted a compost pile. I knew I wanted a tank of water. I knew I wanted a large enough area for growing some different things, some taller grow towers. Originally I had planned to make 3 of those, but this is enough for 60 plants. That's enough for, I think, 20 more plants or 16 more plants. And then I have this, which I need to put up there maybe tonight by a flashlight or headlamp, but as soon as I clean that out, there will be more space. And I have 4 little trees, fruit trees, in pots that I want to bring in here, and there's 1 pot. And so I'm going to do that. So I'll have a little bit of space, and you know, just enough that it's not overkill, and it should be enough for what I need. So that's a sort of an important thing to consider when you're designing everything. And another thing that I forgot to mention, I just cut the grass, threw it right in there, and it's going to make some good compost. Another thing I forgot to mention was when you're choosing a pump and you're choosing pipes for your pump, because I ran into this problem, you need to think about the diameter of your pipes, because the output on this, if it's too wide, then this will fill up with a lot of water and be hard for the pump in order to actually move. And if it's too narrow, your pump's going to be working really hard to pump water, thinking that it has all this resistance, it needs extra force, but that's not going to be the case. It's just that the pipe's too narrow for you to get water through it very fast. So that might burn up your motor. So you have to think about, what size diameter do I need, how many feet of head do I need, and how big of a reservoir do I need. And in case I didn't make it clear before, normally you would need a larger reservoir than this, but as these two tanks are connected, essentially I have the surface area, I have the top, you know, two or 3 inches of this tank and that tank and this tank that can all be pumped up there from right here because of gravity and because of this pipe connecting them. So that's another important thing to think about. Normally you'd need a larger sized area for your tank, and it will take time for this to refill as it's pumped out, but that's okay because it has the float switch in there, so it'll shut off whenever it runs out and it'll refill, and then it'll turn back on again, and it'll all work fine. Basically, you just need to think about a lot of different stuff when you're designing something like this, and I've spent a lot of time thinking it out. Not everything's gone as I had thought that it would originally, but that's okay. That's part of problem solving, and anytime you get something done, basically there's a process, and that's part of the process. So hopefully the next time I'm on a video, this will all be together and running. But for the moment, we're going to see just if it works now. After changing that, everything else should be fine. I just put a 5 amp fuse in here, and I guess I don't need to cover that up right now. So let's see if it works. I'm sort of nervous about this because when I connect this, it's going to try to pump immediately because of the float switch in there. Alright, so let's try it. Didn't work. Alright, let's see why. I put a fuse in there. How about... Okay, let's look at this. None of these things are lit up, but it does say that my load's connected. So, let's see. Perhaps my fuse just blew already. I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, but that's the first thing I'm going to check. Yep, fuse is blown. So it's requiring more than 5 amps. The pump actually says that I should use a 6 amp fuse. So I'm going to get a 6 amp fuse and see if that works. So now I have a 7.5 amp fuse, and I'm going to see just how well it works. Can't forget to disconnect my battery here. Positive terminal, as always. So I'm going to put this in here. My controller here just figured out that I had a wiring problem with the battery because I disconnected it. Took a little longer than I thought it would. And let's see if everything lights up whenever I connect this again. And it blew immediately. That's not right. That's unfortunate. We're gonna have to figure this out. So I went back to a 5 amp fuse, disconnected the battery, I took the pump out of the water, so now it's not trying to automatically switch on because of the water and the float switch. So hopefully when I reconnect the battery this time it won't short out, and if that's the case, there's a problem with the pump or something else is happening with the pump. Okay, everything up here is running. That's a good sign. So maybe nothing too important is blown up. Alright. So let's see. 5 amps are running this just fine. What about if I try to run the pump with the switch? It's find out what happens there. Okay, nothing bad seemed to happen. Now I'm going to slowly put the pump back in the water, and we'll see what happens there. Nothing happened there. And whenever I try to turn the pump on, everything blew up again. Okay. So why is that the case? Something to do with the automatic switch on the pump. Which is odd because it's the same as the manual switch. Unless there's water inside. So, I was having a problem with this pump, as you might recall. For me that was yesterday, for you that might be a few seconds ago. So, the only thing I could do, I checked all the connections, I checked the wires, I checked the circuits, made sure nothing was shorting out, that I could find. So the only thing left to check was the pump itself. It would run fine on manual, but not on automatic when it was going to use its own float switch and start by itself. So the only solution I could come up with was to open it up, and that took about an hour. It was very tightly sealed, but I found something very interesting. Ta-da! It is all corroded, and it looks like it's worse than it could have been if water had contacted it since I've had it. It might have sat around in storage for a while, or some crazy thing might have somehow happened that let this get some water on it. So, unfortunately, this is not going to work. So what I did was, I went to, first of all, I tried Walmart. Walmart had a pump, 500 gallons per hour, no automatic float switch, which this one had, and was one of the reasons I really like this one, because if I supply power to this pump all the time, it can't be running all the time. If I supply it for 3 minutes, it can't be running for 3 minutes, because it's going to pump all the water out of there, and it's going to need to be shut off when that happens. Okay, 750 gallons per hour. I think, if I remember right, that's about 12 gallons a minute. So if this runs for 1 minute, it's going to pump 12 gallons. And that is not 12 gallons. That's maybe 1 or 1.5 gallons. So it's going to be sitting there pumping just dry air, which for some pumps is bad. For this one, it's not a problem because it was going to shut off by itself with that float switch. So what I had to do was find a pump. I went to Harbor Freight. Walmart's didn't work, but Harbor Freight had 15 different types of pumps. Sort of saved the day in one respect, but only a couple of them had a float switch, and only a couple of them worked on 12 volts. Most of them were for alternating current. So, unfortunately, I now have this awesome pump, which was regularly, I think, $34.99, but I got it on sale for $21.99, I think. And this one, I don't know if you can see it on the video, but this one's 1,000 gallons per hour. The other one was 750. This one has maximum head lift of 13 feet as opposed to 9 feet. And this one's better all around except for two things. It does not have a float switch, which means I need to find a float switch, which I ordered off of eBay for around $10. Walmart had one for $20. I didn't want to pay that, so The only other downside is that this draws 5.5 amps. And all of my circuits over here are rated for 10 amps maximum. Which means, you know, 5.5 will work. I don't know how much they actually consume themselves. So say that 5.5 goes up to 6 or 6.5, or it should be less than that, but you know, just in case. So I should be able to stay under 10 amps, and I'll use a 10 amp fuse. I'm going to try a 7.5 amp fuse just in case that works, because it would be better to stop short of 10 amps since those are supposed to have maximum 10 amps. You know, it's getting kind of close to the limit there. So I'm going to wire this pump in, run it manually several times a day, and wait for the float switch to get here. It said about a week. Here's a really cool thing. When you're working on a budget, which I am, you gotta do with what you can get. So I found the coolest thing for $4.99 at Harbor Freight, and I looked at Lowe's for something like this. I think it was going to be $20, $25, $30 for a digital version, but this is going to tell me my slope for my solar panel. And if you remember, I needed around 53 degrees, and I just eyed it up using a triangle with some markings on it for how many degrees the angles were. But that was a pretty primitive way of going about it. But this thing, which is really cool, you should set it down where your slope is, and then this little arrow will still point up. So I can just set it right on the solar panel, and it's going to tell me what angle I have. So that's really cool. Let's go try it. It's only $5. That's awesome. Alright, it might not be super easy to see what's happening in this video, because the camera's wide angle lens sort of things get far away quickly, let's put it that way. So I'm going to just tell you what's happening in case you can't see it. Anyway, this says it's magnetic. I don't think this is magnetic, but I'm going to sit this on here. This goes up to, it's shaking a little bit, but it's around 51, 52. My target was 53. I'm not going to mess with it at all because I don't want to mess with it at all. 52 is close enough to 53 as far as I'm concerned. It has an interesting little table on the back. Huh. It shows angle in degrees versus the pitch per inch and the pitch per foot. That's pretty cool. Anyway, yeah, super useful. $5. I expected to pay more than that. That's why I bought this one when I saw it. So that's pretty cool. Something like this might help you. Now, being nighttime with less glare, I can show you how my fish are doing in here. I have that one large fish there in the back that actually was caught by a fishing pole out of a pond. And you can see how clear the water is. There's a little bit of stuff just floating around on top, but here's a little update. So here's how everything looks down here now. And I'm actually going to remove these. I think the idea is there, but so much water leaks out of these holes. There's no water running right now, so there's not a lot coming out. But whenever the water flows, it really comes out those holes. Even the ones that are positioned and facing a little bit upward. I don't know why. I've seen people use these cups a lot, but they never really have water flowing, you know, out the holes. I don't know what the problem is there for me, but I would expect that to not happen, but it does. So these plants were too small to bring out here. I'm pretty sure that's why they are doing terribly. This still works fine, and I'm going to have to keep this for root crops, but I'm going to make sure that the plants get bigger before putting them in here, because they just don't grow. I don't know if it's the cold air. I don't know if they're not getting enough water, or if the water's too cold or what, but if it was a larger plant, it would certainly be doing better. So I went ahead and got some pebbles from Lowe's. You can get like a 50-pound bag for $3 or $4 to put in here. So, you know, this will add to well, actually, okay, this subtracts from the amount of water that I need to put in here in order for it to drain. So that means it'll drain more often, which is good. And the water level in here will rise and fall less between drains, which is also good because the water level here is tied in with my pump's water level. And I tried to make a float switch over here, but it wasn't working, and I guess I don't really need it. So this is still working fine. I went ahead and put a rock on top just so that no sand came out, you know, between them. They're not actually bonded together or anything. It's working really well. And I was having a problem with my pump again. So I have looked at the wiring over and over and over. But before I get ahead of myself, this pump didn't have an automatic switch. I think I mentioned that before. It's hard to remember. So I basically, one of these lines, yeah, this line is from the manual switch I had, and this line was from the automatic one, or from the circuits. So it was my understanding that whichever one kicked on, you know, the current would travel up here and then go down there, and it wouldn't matter that they were together like that. Which in theory is right. But every time the fuse, every time this started to run, you know, it's counting down all the time. That's been working forever. But every time it would get down and switch over, and the pump was supposed to be, you know, running, it just wouldn't do it. The fuse would blow no matter what I did. 7.5 amp fuse, 10 amp fuse, always blew up, and I do not know why. So I followed the wires, checked the wiring. I took out a few things that I didn't really need, like this LED light strip. I mean, it was fun to put it in there, and it was sort of, it was more of a novelty. It really didn't have that much use, even red, or even if it had been white. I didn't use it that much. It didn't give that much light, so it was just a hazard, you know, something where causing parts that could fail, basically, and you want to eliminate as many things that could go wrong as possible. So I took that out, and some of the wiring's still there, but okay. At long last, after a lot of testing different things, I thought there was nothing wrong anywhere except this circuit. And I didn't know why it was allowing more than 10 amps, because the pump never drew more than 4.5 amps. Whenever it first kicks on, it goes to maybe like 4.7 amps. I used a multimeter to check that. Couldn't figure out why it would blow the fuse every time. But eventually I found out, okay, I'll go ahead and take the manual line out. That way there's just one line coming from the circuit, coming down here, and then the negative running back, you know, to the negative terminal. So that worked fine. And then I tried the switch, and the switch worked fine without the other line coming down from the circuit. So that all made sense, and I thought, well, maybe the current, you know, maybe it's coming from the circuit, going down there to where they're tied together, and coming back to this switch, and finding its way back to there, or to the positive terminal up there, or any terminal, which would be shorting it out, you know, like a long route out and back, and just shorting it out. And every time I looked at it, I thought, oh, that's not the problem, because this switch is off, so it's not coming back through. Well, here's the thing, it was coming back through, because this rocker switch here, you know, the manual switch that I have here, power was coming back on this line, which I already knew it would, but it was making its way from here on the ground terminal back to the controller. So it was shorting out anyway, even though I thought, well, if it's off, that means there's no current. Well, since this rocker switch has a little light in it, it needs a plus and a minus like everything else. So the positive side's coming up here, here's the load, and down here is earth. You can see the little writing there probably. So I always thought it was traveling back, and I realized today it's traveling back and hitting this ground terminal and going back up to the controller and shorting it out. And eventually I figured out that that was the problem. You know, after weeks of trying stuff, thinking other things were wrong, at first I thought that pump was bad, and it turned out to be bad. But that might not have even been the reason that it wasn't running. It could have just been that it was grounding out. Let's see what it looks like now. Yeah, it's in pretty rough shape. But, you know, it might have even still ran. Except for that little problem. But now, it's working. So my setup now, it's on for 5 seconds and off for 20 seconds. And that was the first time I've heard it run automatically. And I'm pretty excited about that. So, done a lot of thinking about all that. And thought about just removing this line, adding that switch somewhere else, which is what I was going to have to do. But I ended up not doing that because I found out, oh yeah, it's taking this ground line, it's coming in through the load line, hitting the ground line and going back to there. Because this switch, it's not opened and closed. It's like, it's closed over here, and then you switch it, and it's closed over here. So it could still travel back, rather than the other way. Well, that's hard to explain, but suffice to say, it wasn't just open-closed, it was actually closed over here, or closed over here. And that's how power found its way back to the charge controller. So, at long last, I found out my problem. And I'm going to switch these out. Because now these are getting enough water. Water often enough. But I don't like how it all drains down. I sort of got on a tangent there. But, you know, I was pretty happy to figure that out. So, this is pretty cool. The water's draining out of there. Out of those buckets right here, it's coming out. There's some shavings inside the bucket from when I drilled the holes. But, pretty cool. You can see whatever doesn't drip off over here from the flow, there's nothing there. I mean, this is just like a flat piece of plastic, but it's just sitting on top of there and not coming off. The cool thing about that is surface tension. And I used it to my advantage here, because what happens instead, the water's holding itself together here strong enough, but whenever it runs down this little bump here, it gets enough flow and enough force that the surface tension can't hold it together anymore, and it flies off the edge, just as a little trickle. But that's why it's not coming off up here, and that's really cool. I mean, I knew what surface tension was and everything, but I just thought to see it like this just made it really cool. So, you know, I don't have a lot of water coming down in here, but, you know, as I mentioned, this thing here, it holds 16 plants, and until today it wasn't getting water automatically, but now it's getting it every 20 minutes. But yeah, I don't like how much leaks down there, and if there's ever too much flow, then it might come off of this, or it might end up, you know, it might just pull itself underneath of there and end up going down under the wood or whatever. I don't want to have to deal with all that. I'm not using this one right now in the first place, so I'm just going to get rid of it. I might keep it for later whenever I have I'm going to switch to PVC. I still believe that the concept is here, but I'm going to use a couple PVC pipes, and then I won't have to worry about a bunch of stuff leaking out or, you know, other problems. I put a lot of work into these, and I wanted something thick, but PVC is going to work until the roots get really thick. So I'm gonna try that out, and I could always switch this back. I'm going to keep these. I could always come back to this if I need to. So I wanted to make a little bit of a little video, I guess you could say evidence of what's been happening here, because I don't remember what the last thing I put on here was. I know I didn't have these things in here. So I didn't want to do a bunch of work and then change a bunch of stuff and not have any record of it. So that's where I am at this point. And it got pretty nice today. It's been pretty crappy out lately, but today it was clear. We're at 75% humidity, which is what I thought was causing my problem with the circuit over there. I thought the humidity got too high and it ended up shorting something out or whatever. Some other miscellaneous problem that I couldn't identify. So I actually already ordered a new one of these for $10 last night. You know, after weeks of trying to figure out what exactly was happening. But then, you know, a few days ago, I realized, hey, I've never actually had this thing work for me. And then I tried to figure out why, and I couldn't figure out why, but now I did. So, I was pretty excited. So this is a long clip, but, you know, it was exciting for me, and I hope if you're doing anything like this that you think outside the box, first of all, but also you have to question everything, because if this was just open and closed like I thought, then I would have never had this problem. And every time I looked at this, I thought, oh no, the power can't go anywhere because it's open right now. Not the case. It was closed on one side or closed on the other side, and that was grounding me out. But now it's only open over here, and I didn't connect the ground side, so that electricity is only flowing one way, and it can't ground out there anymore. So I'm excited about that. Another little update here. Okay, on for 5 minutes, off for 20 minutes. That comes to being on for 6 minutes every day. And I just checked everything else. I just checked the voltage in there. This controller is working really well. It's putting it up to 14.7 volts. My 12-volt battery, you know, the overcharge. And you definitely need that, because if you don't have it, it's going to keep charging and it's going to end up burning something up or causing, I don't know, some miscellaneous problem. It won't be any good if it charges too high. So that's what a charging controller does. It prevents damage to different things, because when the charge, say the charge is 12 volts, it'll actually take it up a little higher, just like a car battery will do, and then it'll drain down, and then it'll stop it. So you can never get too much charge, you can never get too little charge. You always end up like within this range. So I checked that today with a voltmeter or a multimeter, and I heard somebody call it a multimeter. I thought that was funny, but I guess it's the same word. So anyhow, I checked it and it was maxed out 14.7 volts. So the solar panel is sufficient for 6 minutes of running that pump, and it runs around 4.5 amps every day. No, 4.5 amps when it's running. So I guess that means, you know, if it ran for an hour, it would use 4.5 amps. I don't know how all that works, but I know this setup's sufficient. My solar panel out there is 100 watts, I think. Pretty sure, 100 watts. So there's all the information that I have. hopefully you enjoyed this part of the video, and next time I show you this, most of that will be PVC. So, I've changed quite a bit of things in the last 2 days. Most of this I did last night. I took the buckets off, and my plants are still sitting in there, and I need to move those. I haven't moved them yet. We have this big tub here. I had a really good price on it, so I bought it, and it says here it's LDPE. It's like recycled low density polyethylene, I think is what it stands for. And I put this in here for my siphon valve or siphon pump, and it's going to drain into here via this tube, though I need to figure out a better way to position this tube, because right now the level's too high. It wouldn't end up building any pressure unless it's trying to drain, you know, below the bottom of that. So that's another work in progress. But I filled all of these PVC pipes with holes, and so my plan is to start them in the smaller pipe when the roots are smaller and they don't weigh very much, and that's why there are more of them, in case some of them don't survive. But then I have this larger pipe with larger holes so I can get the roots in and out easier. And if I get to this point when I have plants that are too large even to fit in there to get the roots in and out comfortably, then I will buy a larger pipe. But at the moment there's no point in doing that, and I'll have to figure out where to put another pipe. So I wanted to get everything up and running before dealing with all of that. So as you may remember, I tried to make my own float valve because the pump that I bought didn't have one built in. So I had to, first I tried to buy one, and it's too large for the container that I want to put it in. It doesn't actually float. It doesn't kick on fast enough, so it would end up not doing me any good. And then the second time I tried to make one with this, thinking I could put a switch on it so that whenever the water level raised, it would activate it, and when it went down far enough, it would kick off. That was the concept, but since the wire moves around, it's hard to really do that reliably. You can do it, you know, a little bit, but to do it reliably, it's hard. So then I thought about my old pump, because the old pump was corroded, but the float valve part still probably worked. So I opened it up, and it does. So I went ahead and wired them together. So instead of having the, see, here's the switch right here. As the water level goes up, this clicks and the current takes a different path. So instead of just letting it go to the motor here, I just connected it to my other pump. So I was pretty happy with that. It seemed like a good idea to me. So I just have it sitting in there, and it's going to be the pump, or the float valve, and it's going to make this other pump run, which is really convenient. It's sad to just scrap something without hardly even using it, which is what I had to do with the other pump. So it's good to find some kind of use for it. So I have it set up now to run for 10 seconds. No, for 5 seconds. I'm going to change it to 10. Maybe even a little bit longer, because what's going to happen is when the water drains through here, these two sets of pipes, it's going to come into this tub. This tub's where I'm going to have to put root crops. That's the whole reason I got this tub, because the bucket, it just wasn't an efficient enough watering system. Only one side of the roots could get water, and Even then, maybe they wouldn't even get water, depending on how much pressure came down. And rather than dealing with all that, a lot of my plants would be dying, and some of them did die because, well, first of all, I didn't have it set up right to water automatically. It was all just me coming down and flipping the switch for a few seconds. So I didn't want to do that forever. Obviously, that's not really a sustainable way to grow anything like this. So now it's going to run every 20 minutes for 10 seconds, and that flow valve is going to tell it when to shut off, because I don't want it to run with just air going through. I want to let it drain and fill up and drain and fill up. So when this gets full, in theory, up to this line, it'll drain into here. Again, I have to do something with this. And I'm not sure what exactly to do with it just yet, but I'm getting there. So there's a little update. That's what I've done, that's what I worked on, and that's going to kick back on in 15 seconds. I might as well just wait for that. There was some water draining out over here. I don't know if... I heard a lot of cracks whenever I was drilling into this pipe. I was using a drill bit that was too large. You definitely want to use a hole saw. So there goes. And let's see where it comes out. Oh, it's just filling this up too fast. I can deal with that. Alright. Well, it went much better this time than it did the last time. And I'm happy to see that there aren't any cracks on the bottom here. So when this fills up, it's going to do the same thing that this side did. While I'm waiting for my sprouts and seeds to grow into plants of the size that I need to put into here, I'm going to try to revitalize some strawberries from last year. So here they are. They weren't... I put them in a container temporarily. They weren't growing very well. They did bloom in the spring, and then they sat there in the sun and didn't get much water. And between then and now, the chickens have pecked at them and dug them up, and they're really in a poor state here. So rather than just letting them die, which they probably already are dead, I'm going to see if I can revitalize some of them by putting them in the system that I've just put together. I've been washing them off. They did grow. When I bought them from some site online, I got 25 each of 4 different kinds. So I should have 100 plants here, even though it doesn't look like 100. So I've just been washing them off, and I'm going to put them in and see if I can get anything to start turning green again. They don't look too good, so I'm an optimist, what can I say? They're probably not going to live, but that's okay. So the system's been running automatically since last night, and I must say, the results have been pretty good already. The plants that are in there now, the broccoli and the other plants that I started earlier, they've been down there for weeks, only me going down and switching it on and off now and then. And they've looked pretty much the same. I could tell that a little bit of the roots formed, but for the most part it was the same size plant and not many changes. But just overnight of that being there running automatically, I already see growth, new growth, since last night on 2 plants. So that's pretty impressive, I think. So last night I reset my slat trap, and when I started to pull it out of the stream here, I was listening for the sound of fish flopping around inside, didn't hear anything. Then I looked in the entrance, and you know what I saw? A big crayfish. A really big crayfish. And he was just sitting in the doorway, so he probably blocked the fish from getting in. But that's not something I expected to catch in here. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. I was looking for diversity in my fish tank. Well, I got it now. And the good side is I can just put him on the side with the little fish, and hopefully he won't eat them. But you know, if he does eat them, well, I'll have to put him in with the big fish and see how he does over there. He hasn't grabbed my stick here, but that's cool. I've never seen a crayfish. I've seen them in the wild, but I haven't seen them with that big of claws and, you know, as lively as this one. So that's pretty cool. So here's a little update on how things are going now. This is probably going to be my last clip in this little video, because I just got a job and I'm going to be moving. So, without further ado, and without any more possibly sadness, I'm going to have to put this project on hold. You can see here the broccoli is doing better than the other things here, which I expected because broccoli is a cold plant. It survives in a wide temperature range. You can see the roots look nice and they're healthy, and these 2 roots here are cucumber or honeydew, one of the 2, because the seeds look pretty similar. So I don't remember which is which. They might both be cucumber, they might both be honeydew. But unfortunately, it gets too cold in here, and I believe that's what caused the downfall. I don't think that it's too wet, because, you know, this is filling and draining all the time, and the water leaves through the bottom. Though the sponge does soak up a little bit of water, so whenever I do something like this in the future, I'm going to use something to hold the plants that doesn't itself retain water. Like gravel or sand or anything like that. The water's just going to drain out and there's nowhere for it to get trapped. But in here, with these sponges holding the plants up, they also fill with water. So then the plant ends up sitting there in that water all the time. So that's one thing I need to take into consideration. But everything else, the whole setup's working out pretty well. You can see I have some algae growing here. And that's, you know, nobody wants algae to clog up anything, but on the bright side, it does mean things are growing in here. So that's what I set out to do, and that's what's happening. So that's always a plus. And here's one of my oldest broccoli plants, and it's every now and then it sprouts a new leaf, which is pretty exciting. And then up here I have a couple more, and this one here, and some of these other things I brought out too early and they've died, or their roots have rotted because of all the water. But this one I believe this is a carrot, and for some reason its roots have not rotted. Most of the other carrots have. I don't know if it has something to do with the temperature here or what. I don't know how it'd be any different. And over here we have another broccoli and another broccoli. A little bit of water on there, making it look all nice and pretty and fresh. So next I'm going to check the battery, because this battery runs the pump, and every now it's kicking on every now and then. So I need to see if it still has a good enough charge. I want to make sure that I'm not exceeding what I can use every day, because then the battery's gonna suddenly stop working if it starts to get cloudy too much, not getting enough sunlight from the solar panel. So let's check that. Gonna go ahead and turn on this voltage meter, expose my terminals here, and we're gonna put it over to DCV 20, negative to negative, and these cheap little prongs here, plastic piece fell off of one. I just soldered the metal to the little prong. Alright, let's see what it does. Alright, 14.61, and I believe this controller will overcharge it to 14.7. So I'm only 0.08 off, and that's good. That means on a nice sunny day it's going to get a little extra, and if I have a string of cloudy days I'm not using too much energy. So that is good. And this is a 35 amp hour battery. It's a deep cycle sealed battery, and everything else here I'm pretty sure I've explained to great detail over the last several months. This is now pumping water every 5 minutes for 3 seconds, because over here I changed my mind again. I took the float switch off. It just wasn't working very well, so I decided just to make it solely run off of the timer. So that's why 3 seconds, in case there's only a little bit of water in here, then it's not going to run while the pump is dry. This type of pump, it's a bilge pump, so it's not going to hurt it. It's not one of the ones that has to stay wet all the time, that needs primed or anything like that. But I just don't want to put any stress or anything on the little motor inside. So that's a little quick rundown on how things are going in here. It's a very nice warm day for December 24th. It's Christmas Eve, and I don't know if how well you can see it, but the thermometer there says about 70 degrees Fahrenheit or about 20 degrees Celsius. Here's my water tank. It's still filling up nicely and overflowing to the corner down there when there's too much water. So I'll also test the pH now while I'm thinking about it. This digital pH tester, I had it sitting on the side and I forgot about it for a while, and I came back and it was laying down. So it does not work anymore. Hey, and there's a worm. I have no idea how it got up here, but it's going in the fish tank. Oh, we got him. Did not waste any time. Well, let's just take a look in here too, because it's been a while since I showed anything about this. So that reminds me, as far as I know, I still have 6 smallish bluegills and 7 tiny little fish that I caught with a net. Let's count them right there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Alright, still got all those. and I caught another crayfish. Actually, I caught 2 crayfish, and then the really big one. Well, the really big one killed one of them. It just crunched it right in the carapace, and I guess the fish hollowed him out and ate all these stuff inside there. So I threw that one out, and oh, there's the big one. I thought he escaped again. He's escaped twice, and I thought a third time. So I was looking all over the place for him, and then I ended up finding him in here. There he is. He's much larger than this other one. He's like twice the size of this one. And it just sits there all the time. Sits right on there where the bubbles come out. And that big fish just basically stays back in the corner. I'm surprised he hasn't really eaten any of those little fish. I mean, those little fish there are like, you know, an inch long. He's eating worms that are 4 or 5 inches long. So that's a little bit of a surprise to me. I guess some fish really just don't want to eat other fish. There, we got some worms. I'm gonna throw the biggest one in for the big fish, and he took them right down. I'm gonna put these little fish in, little worms with the little fish. Ooh, one of the bluegills just took him. That big crayfish wants a place to hide, but he doesn't really have it. While I'm thinking about it, I'm going to cover up these battery terminals so that they don't get wet. And next, I'm going to test the pH. My goal here, well, my goal was to take a little bit of this algae out and put it down here, because a lot of fish do eat algae a little bit. I'm not sure what species this is. It's probably just a really common algae, but I don't know what the fish eat exactly. They might eat it, they might not eat it, but it's not going to really cause any harm either way. So I'm going to go ahead and, where do I have the test strips? There they are. Put this back over here so it doesn't get wet. Okay. You definitely, for your fish food and for your pH strips, if that's what you use, you definitely want to put them in a baggie that seals. You don't want them to get wet, because the food will swell up and rot, mold, and the test strips might not work right if they get wet and sit there for a while, because they need water to be activated, and if they were already activated, whenever you try to use them for your fish, they're probably not going to work right. I don't know, I'm not an expert on pH, so. Oh, don't take my finger off there, fish. He was going for it, man. So I got these test strips, and I copied what the little booklet looked like. I didn't want to just bring that down here in case it ended up getting wet and getting ruined, so I split them up and brought one of these little packs of strips down with a copy of the little legend, or the key. So this one's pretty close to there, unless it just hasn't had enough time yet. So I got some test strips that test pH from I believe, 5.5 to 8. But this booklet this printout's only showing me 6.4 to 8. So anyway, you can get several different ranges. I didn't want 1 to 14 because I need to know the decimal point. They say that most plants stop taking nutrients in at 7.2 or higher. And that's probably not true for all plants, but I want to stay in a safe range, and about 6.5 to 7 is probably the safest range for most plants, where nutrients can still be absorbed through the roots. So I didn't get one that's 1 to 14. I got one that's like in that range that tells me what the decimal place is, approximately. I don't need to know exactly, but approximate number is good. And another reason that that's important, the way pH is, if you don't know this, and you might, but so if you have on the on the list of pH, you have 1 to 14. So right around the middle you have 6 and 7. Well, 6 and 7 is not a standard gradual increase. From 6 to 7, it is 10 times the acidity, or 10 times the alkalinity. So 7 is 10 times more alkaline than 6. So even though that's just one integer, to think that it's 10 times more acidic, you know, that could be really harmful. If you jumped in a bunch of acid between 6 and 7, you would know if you were gonna die. You would know if something was what's the best way of saying this? Basically, it's only one integer, but it's quite a broad range of acidity. So, you know, if you're a plant and you want, say, 6.5 pH, if you're getting 7.5 pH, you're not going to be happy. And it's not even close to the one that you want. That's the point here. So you want to try to stay close to that, and that's why people make a big fuss over pH. The more you feed your fish, the more waste they produce, the higher the pH will get because of all the ammonia and the waste going into the water. So you really want to drop it down. But if you want it to lower, you might want to feed your fish a little bit less, or you might want to supplement your setup with some sort of pH down. And there are different acids. I guess about any acid will do it, but you don't want something that's going to harm your fish or your plants. I got this off of eBay, and it's pH down and it's phosphoric acid. And some people recommend not to use that because it'll cause an algae bloom, an algal bloom. And as far as I'm concerned, I don't care about that. If algae's growing, that means plants are growing, and that's what I want. You know, some people on the internet, I've heard a lot of different things about people using acid from like a car battery, or from, I don't know, all kinds of crazy stuff. And yes, it's going to lower your pH, it's going to make it more acidic, but you have to think about what you're trying to do here. You're trying to raise food, you're trying to you know, help some fish and plants grow. You don't want to just put battery acid in there. And I don't care what, like, I don't know, I don't care what some hillbilly that believes in car battery acid for his plants. I mean, if that's what he wants to do, that's fine. I just don't believe in that. I would like to do something that's supposed to be good for a plant instead of, you know, something unnatural like a battery. But it definitely did cause some algae to grow, and in a way that makes me sort of happy, because it's just more evidence that things are growing and can grow, and I know there aren't problems with my setup if things are growing. And that's the goal here. I want things to grow. And I realize if I ever want to go fishing, this setup that I have, you know, this big pit, There's so many worms that go across the floor here at night, as long as it's not really cold. If it's like maybe 45 degrees Fahrenheit and above, I can find as many worms as I would want for fishing. So if I ever want to do some fishing, and I don't have a setup like this, so any random fisherman out there, if you want to get a bunch of worms, there are two ways to do it. Number one, you go outside at night after it rained a lot with a flashlight and see if you can grab the worms sticking out of the ground before they disappear, because they are sensitive to the light and they'll tense up as soon as your flashlight comes into contact with their skin. Or you dig a hole, you put something on the bottom, like something flat and solid, and you just let it sit there for a while, and over time, unless it's too cold, worms will accumulate under it, and then you just have to pull the thing off and pick up all your worms, and you can go fishing and you have some fresh worms. So I'm just gonna put this sponge in here face down, and maybe the little fish, when they find the algae on it, maybe they'll start eating some of the algae off of there. And hopefully there are no chemicals in that sponge, whatever it's made with, that would leak. I know some sponges you're not supposed to use in an aquarium, so hopefully that's not one of them. There was nothing on the instructions. It didn't come with instructions or a label or anything. So the little fish there are checking it out. Big crayfish there is trying to hide himself. Little crayfish is still sitting there on the place where the bubbles come out. And I'm not sure why that's not running right now. Maybe the sun already passed. And here we have our siphon valve that just started to work again. So now this is going to fill. Another thing I can do, in fact I will do, I'm going to scrape up a little bit of this algae. Let's see. I'm going to scrape a little bit of algae because this is now filling with water, and I want it to flow through and have the algae that's in here to get carried down to the fish. So if I disturb this, it'll be floating around, and then it'll get sucked down there. So that's the goal right now. This one's doing really well. Geez, even this gravel looks like it's turning green with algae. So the idea here was to get other plants and plant them into here. Well, alright. I guess that's everything. Thanks for watching. If you watched the whole way through, you're a trooper. And whatever you're growing, if you're growing something, good luck. I'll try to answer some questions. If you have questions, just leave them as a comment. What I would like to do is the first week, I'm going to take all the questions or comments and make another short little clip about, my answers, my reactions, whatever people have questions about. I'd like to maybe give them a little bit of experience, but so as a result, when you have a big project or any kind of project, the list of results are as good, if not better, than the start to finish of the project, because you want to learn something, you want to make what you did useful, so here are some results. Number one, the setup for the wall worked well. The wall's still standing. It's not bowing out. It's not getting wet. So the design I put for the outside seems to be working well. And this side's not being pushed over. So what I did out there is working well. I put a block. There's not just dirt on the other side of that wall there. There's a 4x4 with a cinder block on the other side of it, and that's sort of bracing this wall, and then the cinder block's just buried in the dirt. It would be very hard and take a lot of force for something to push that wall into the cinder block and through the dirt. It's a big cinder block. So that's why I did that, and it's working well. Number two, this tank of water is working very well using the pipe thread, tap, and dye. Let's see, just the tap, yes, using the tap. That's working, it's not leaking anywhere, and the only thing that I would change next time, if I do anything like this, or if you're doing something like this, this might be useful to you. I have the water that drains off the roof coming down here and entering the pipe, and it looks like the wind, when I get heavy winds and the top mushrooms up a little bit, this gets pulled out, and then I need to put it back in there. So that's well and fine, but I should not have put this here in the corner of the roof, because heat loss is a big problem, and that's just going to create other little holes, or cracks, or whatever you want to call it. More potential heat loss, and that's not something that you want. So I should have put a drain farther out, away from the roof, for water to collect in and then come in by pipe and then make its way over to the barrel, rather than having it on the roof. Then there would be less heat loss. Another thing that I could have made better, there's two sheets of plastic here. First of all, one's for construction, which when I ordered it I didn't know that's what it was for. So it's not letting in as much heat as, say, true greenhouse plastic, which is mostly clear. So that's one thing that needs changed. And another thing is that they shouldn't just be two layers laying on top of each other. I figured that means it's going to have to go through two layers of plastic before heat can escape. And that's true. But it would be better if I had a layer of plastic and then these boards, or these strips, in between them, and then the other layer of plastic. And that would create a section of air. So air would have to escape from here and go in through that layer and mix with that air and then escape from there again. And the more air you could hold into that middle segment there between the two sheets of plastic where the wood would be, the more air you can hold in there, the longer it will take for all of this air to pass through there and escape and cool the inside here. So that's another thought. And that's what the original plan was, but I didn't see any way of keeping the lower layer of plastic held up after putting the wood up, because I would have to, say, put another few boards or something to hold the bottom layer of plastic up. So another thing that I would do differently is the door. I would definitely either invest in a pre-built door or make a more solid door, because this is 3/8 inch thick plywood, and it's right there. That's as thin as this is. So he's probably not going to have too hard of a time to go through there. Even if I can seal up the outsides, get rid of all the cracks, it's just, there's nothing to really keep heat from transferring through it. And wood's the same way. Everything has its own level of, its rate of heat loss. But, you know, that's probably a weak spot compared to everything else, because here, a lot of these boards are, you know, 1 inch thick or 1.5 inches thick. But then I have this thin plastic on top, and then I have this thin door. So those are definitely the vulnerabilities as far as heat loss goes. And everything else, you know, other than the obvious, when I put those two pieces of plastic 100 by 20 and cutting it in half and making it 50 by 40, that also made this long crack along here, which didn't tape up as well as I had hoped. I tried to make it very airtight and flush before taping, but when you get something that big, it just doesn't work, because you have to walk on it, and that creates ripples, and then you're trying to tape it, and it doesn't work as well as it would in theory. So that's why I sandwiched the plastic sheets between these, this one, let's see, 1 by 1 or 2 by 2, I think it's 2 by 2, cut in half. So I sandwiched it in there thinking that's going to hold it together and reduce every crack that's up there, and I think it has, but you definitely don't want to do that unless you have to. You just want this to hold, the whole thing, the whole ceiling should be one solid sheet, no cracks, no potential heat loss, and then you have your strips of boards holding everything into place, and then you have your other sheet. And that's ideal. That's what you want. You don't want to risk heat loss if you don't have to. So there's another thought. And the final thing that I want to say that I should do better next time, and that might help somebody else. This compost, as far as I could tell, did not release much heat, and it's probably because I just need more in there, and I need to mix it up. But since I have this broccoli growing, I didn't do that. There aren't very many leaves around here. I'd have to go like on the hill and get some leaves. So I didn't do that, and it hasn't been getting very cold. The broccoli's growing. The other stuff, I don't know what temperatures it all needs. So it might have to have like another 20 degrees in there for it to grow well. And that's not something I can sustain the way everything else is put together between the plastic for the roof and the thin door. So that's another concern. And finally, as far as outside goes, here's another problem. So I put all this soil down on top of plastic, thinking that's going to make everything airtight, so that air can't just run up underneath the sheet of plastic, and it can't get in there and cool everything down. Which I think that's been working very well, but I didn't make the layer of dirt thick enough, so the grass seed that I put down here in most places is not growing. It's growing here because this is probably where water pools whenever it rains, and it's getting a lot of water, and maybe the soil is a little thicker there too. But for the most of it, I spread grass seed everywhere, and most places don't have anything growing, with a few exceptions. There's some growing here. There's a little bit growing in a lot of places, but nothing thick. And that might have something to do with the temperature out here too, and it probably does. But if you can do it all at the right time of year, say the spring or late winter, after it stops freezing outside and being poor weather conditions for grass to grow, that's definitely when you should do it. And make sure you use enough dirt that the grass roots can grow and spread out so they can collect water. Because another thing that happens here is it'll rain and the water will be right there and available for all the grass roots. But since it's on top of plastic, it quickly evaporates, or it'll run down off the plastic and carry some soil with it. So you're losing soil and the rainwater's going away really quick. Those are both bad things for a growing root and for germinating seeds. Soil dries out, things don't grow. And so, as I was mentioning before, this is where the drain is inside. I should have put it out here. Say the water rolls down off the roof and comes down right here, and I should have put a drain here somehow, and going in through the dirt and in through the wall inside and over to that barrel, rather than risking heat loss right here. So that's another thing to be concerned about and to keep in mind. Everything else seems to have worked pretty well. It did take a good bit of thought and consideration before I started all this. And here's what the top of this sandwiched plastic looks like. So you can see I drilled it from the bottom so that there would be no hole up here for water to enter. And that seems to have worked pretty well. Then these strips of wood are holding the plastic down, so if it gets really windy, I won't lose my plastic, because if wind's allowed to congregate anywhere, to pool, then it will mass up and this will get ripped off really quick. And I reduced that a lot by putting these boards around here. And this grass, or this sod, I dug from other little spots around here to give it weight, because the dirt's very heavy and it's cheap. It's very easy to come by if you have a yard. So I took up squares of sod and used them to weight down different areas so that there would be less airflow under them. And that's the same idea with the tires. And all of this stuff, these bricks here and these rocks that I got from digging out some of this shale, they were going to be built into a staircase here, or some steps you should say. That didn't end up happening. That was a very low priority. I wanted everything inside to be working well so that my plants could survive before dealing with any of that. So that was something that, if I ever come back, and what I want to do is come back later on, maybe take some of this out of here, put better quality materials in there, and sort of redo the whole thing, I guess you could say, knowing that it works, knowing that it could work. I might come back and do that when something like that can be financially viable. Here's another thought. So, I mentioned about pH and why pH is important, and you can find tons of information about that online. But here's something you have to consider when you get a growing medium like I have here. I got this rock from Lowe's. They were pebbles. I forget what they're called, like pea gravel or something. Well, you're supposed to rinse it off very well, and I did, but it's still releasing a lot of higher pH into the water. So I either have to wash it better, which is why I spread it out here in this wheelbarrow, so that rainwater would wash it out, and then I can use all of this up here, and it shouldn't add anything or take away anything from the pH. Because it's harder to lower pH than it is to raise it. If you want to raise pH, just give your fish more food. But if you lower pH by giving your fish less food so that they'll create less waste, that's going to slow the growth of your plants, because you want waste for your plants. So you don't want to add anything that could change the pH. Plastic's not going to change the pH because it's not porous. But if you have anything that's like anything that could be porous, or have any kind of chemicals on it, or have a lot of dust from being gathered, I don't know. There are a lot of different things that can mix into your water and change the pH. And you want to make sure that if you add anything, especially growing mediums, that they also don't change your pH at all. So a temporary fix for that is why I got the acid, that pH down. That was meant to solve that problem temporarily. And another thing that you can do is to keep changing your water out every few days or once a week. You take your water, take like a bucket of water out, maybe 25 or 30% of the total water in the fish tanks. You take it out and you dump it, and then you put the rainwater in, and rainwater should be around 7 pH. So if you have anything higher than that, that could help lower the pH in your tank. If you have anything lower than that and you want to raise your pH, you can do that. But for me, mine was a little bit too high, so I've been changing the water pretty often, and it's real nice and easy since I have that water reservoir there. So having the built-in water reservoir also made things a lot easier and faster. I didn't have to bring in water from anywhere else. And my supply will not run dry suddenly if it gets really hot and it doesn't rain for a while. And so that's another thing to consider. If those totes hold 18 gallons, two totes are 36 gallons. If that's a 55-gallon tank, that's enough water to pretty much completely fill it 2 times. But if I only take, say, 1/3 of the water out every time, I can supply that with water from the barrel 4 or 5 times at least. So I can make water last through the winter. And you want your reservoir to be 2 or 3 times larger than your the water in the rest of your system. So those are some things to think about if you're doing anything like this. If you want to do something like this, hopefully that information can help you. I've certainly talked about a lot of different things. Maybe some people are tired of hearing my voice, but a lot of the good things can come from having experience in something. So if you're thinking about growing some stuff, my advice is to do it. You can do it on any scale, large or small. Grow something healthy or anything. Or you could do a large scale thing and feed your whole family, not have to buy anything in the store. That's the goal. You never want to spend anything more than you have to, because there are always other people out there trying to get what you've worked for, and they want to there are fundraisers everywhere, and there's bills and there's taxes, and everybody's trying to figure out how to get more of your money away from you. So it would definitely be a plus to grow your own food, especially organically. If you buy an organic cucumber, you might spend like $2 on an organic cucumber. But if you grow the plant, you might have 150 cucumbers. And that's $300 you didn't have to spend. And you're eating something healthy. I mean, that's poor math, but that could be a lot of savings. And then if you think you have, 3 or 4 cucumber plants, a couple of tomatoes, a couple other things, you're getting maybe dozens of pounds of tomatoes from one plant or more. The math checks out, and I'm not very good at math. You can save a lot of money just by growing a few plants. Good luck. Whatever you do, good luck.